Yo, what's up, everyone? It's Veil Soul, and today we're checking out what if Temari was sent to seduce Naruto for the Sand Village but became his spy instead. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1. The assignment. The letter arrived before dawn. Temari was already awake. She usually was, an old habit from years of early watch rotations that her body refused to unlearn even in peacetime. She was sitting at the edge of her window with a cup of tea going cold in her hand, watching the desert turn from black to deep violet as the sun threatened the horizon when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, official cadence. She opened the door before the messenger could knock again. The boy, barely a genin, couldn't have been more than 13, thrust a sealed scroll toward her with both hands and the rigid posture of someone who'd been told this was important and had taken that instruction very seriously. The seal was red wax pressed with the council's insignia, not Gaara's, the council's. She took it without a word and closed the door in the boy's face. The scroll's contents were brief, which was itself a kind of message. Men like Elder Rasa believed brevity communicated authority. Report to the council chamber at 7th bell. Speak of this to no one, including the Kazekage. Temari set the scroll on her table, finished her cold tea in one long pull, and stared at the ceiling for a moment, including the Kazekage. She'd been in this world long enough to know that any sentence containing those words was either very important or very stupid, sometimes both. The council chamber was carved directly into the rock beneath the administrative building. Old architecture from before the village had proper foundations, when the first sand shinobi had hollowed out their meeting rooms the way animals hollow out dens. It still smelled like that. Rock dust and old smoke, and the particular dryness that meant you were deep underground with no water nearby. Temari had always found it fitting. The men who liked to meet down here were the same breed, dug in, dried out, and convinced that depth was the same thing as wisdom. There were 4 of them waiting when she arrived. Elder Rasa sat at the head of the low table, his hands folded, his eyes doing that thing they always did where they moved slightly slower than his head and gave the impression he was cataloging you. He was 60-something and looked older, wind-cracked skin, a jaw like quarried stone, white hair cut short and severe. He'd been on the council since before Temari's father had taken the Kazekage hat. He'd survived her father, which in itself said something. The other 3 she knew less well. Councillor Dama, a thin woman who handled trade negotiations and rarely spoke in open session. 2 men whose names she always confused, twins or close enough, who represented the village's oldest founding clans and generally voted as a single unit. No Gaara. She sat down without being invited to and crossed her arms. "You didn't invite my brother," she said. "The Kazekage has enough to manage," Rasa said. His voice was like gravel shifting. "This is an advisory matter." "Advisory to whom?" "To the village." He tilted his head slightly. "We have a situation, Temari, one that requires someone with your particular combination of skills." She waited. Rasa unfolded his hands and set them flat on the table. It was a practiced gesture, deliberate, meant to signal openness while communicating nothing of the kind. "You're aware of Uzumaki Naruto's current position within Konoha's power structure. He's being groomed for Hokage," Temari said. "Everyone's aware. He's more than that now." Rasa's eyes moved. "Since the war, he has become, consolidating is perhaps the right word. His relationships with the other village's key operatives, his personal bonds with the Reikage people, with Kirigakure's new guard, with the remnants of Iwa's reformed faction. The man is building a network, whether he intends to or not, and Konoha has always been very good at making intention irrelevant after the fact." Temari kept her face neutral. She wasn't going to give him the nod he was fishing for. "The concern," he continued, "is that Sand's interests may be, quietly, subordinated in whatever new order emerges. We are resource-dependent. Our trade routes run through Fire Country. Our most significant military assets are either gone," he meant her father, her uncle, the generations of casualties, "or they are currently serving as political symbols." He meant Gaara. He was too careful to say it directly. "What do you want me to do?" Temari said flatly. Damas spoke for the first time, her voice precise and unhurried. "We want you to go to Konoha. officially as part of the ongoing joint village coordination efforts. The next round of post-war administrative meetings begins in 3 weeks. Your presence would be unremarkable. And unofficially, Rasa laced his fingers together again. Develop proximity to Uzumaki. He trusts people quickly. It's perhaps his most exploitable characteristic. You already have existing rapport with several Konoha shinobi, including the Nara boy who is engaged to you. Shikamaru, Temari said, and her voice came out even. His name is Shikamaru. Yes, Rasa didn't blink. That connection gives you natural access. Use it. Get close to Uzumaki. Understand his plans, his thinking, his relationships. We need to know what Konoha is actually building before the ink dries on whatever architecture they're constructing. There was a pause. The rock walls soaked it up. You're asking me to spy on Naruto using my fiancé as cover, Temari said. We're asking you to protect this village's future, Dama said. Temari looked at the table. It was old wood, cracked down the middle and filled with resin at some point, someone's repair job that had never looked quite right. She thought about that for a moment, about things that had cracked and been filled in and never looked quite right afterward. And if I decline, Rasa's expression didn't change. Then we send someone less suited to the task, someone who might handle things with less finesse. She understood what that meant, someone who might not be content with information. She stood up. I'll think about it. 7th bell tomorrow, Rasa said, with your answer. She was at the door when Dama added, almost gently, You're the best we have for this, Temari. That's not flattery. It's assignment criteria. Temari left without responding. The walk back to her apartment took her through the village's main market corridor, which was just beginning to wake up. Vendors dragging out awnings. A few early risers picking through yesterday's bread. She walked through it all and felt like she was moving through water. Thick, slow, she wasn't shocked. That was the part that sat wrong with her. She should have been shocked, the council going around Gaara, using her engagement as operational cover, pointing her at someone she'd fought beside during the war like he was a target on a mission board. She should have felt some sharp moral recoil. Instead, she felt something colder and more functional. She was already analyzing it, already turning it over. That's the problem, she thought. That's exactly the problem. She went home and wrote 2 letters. One to the council, confirming she would take the assignment. One to Shikamaru, telling him she was coming to Konoha early and that she'd explain when she arrived. She stared at the second letter for a long time before sealing it. She didn't explain anything. She never had been good at that. The journey from Sunagakure to Konoha was 3 days on foot or a day and a half by the wind, and Temari took the wind. Not literally, though she could have managed something close to it with the right combinations of chakra-assisted movement and her fan's drafts. But she moved fast, sleeping in short rotations, eating on the road, arriving at Konoha's gates on the morning of the 2nd day with dust in her hair and a completely composed expression on her face. The gate guards recognized her immediately. One of them, young, probably a recent promotion, actually straightened up like she was someone important, which she supposed she was. Temari of the Sand, he said, consulting his clipboard with the earnest energy of someone who wanted to demonstrate competence. You're early. The coordination meetings don't begin for another 2 weeks. I know, she said. Early visit, coordination with the Nara clan. She let that sit there because it was true enough to be unimpeachable. He stamped her entry papers and she walked through. Konoha was, she always forgot, between visits, how it felt to walk into it. Suna was a city of angles and stone, and the particular beauty of things built to survive hostility. Konoha was a city that had been built like something was expected to grow here. Trees everywhere, not just the massive ones at the forest edge, but smaller ones worked into the architecture, growing up through deliberate gaps in building designs, their roots visible in the stone work of older streets. It smelled like green things and rain even when it hadn't rained. She'd never admitted to anyone that she found it beautiful. She had a room reserved at a mid-tier inn near the administrative district, nothing so close to the Hawkage building that it suggested she was here on official business, nothing so far that it would be inconvenient. She'd picked it herself when Rasa's people had sent her the preliminary logistics. She washed the road off her face, changed her clothes, braided her hair tight, and went to find Shikamaru. He was where he always was when he wasn't on assignment, in the Nara clan's back garden, lying in a specific patch of grass that caught the morning sun at an angle he'd apparently been using since he was a child, and had never felt the need to update. He had one arm over his eyes and a half-eaten rice ball balanced on his chest. "You're 2 weeks early," he said without moving. "I know." She sat down next to him in the grass, not close enough to be affectionate. They weren't really an affectionate couple, which suited them both. Something came up. He moved his arm slightly and looked at her with one eye. Shikamaru had a particular talent for looking at people with only part of his face and still communicating that he'd understood everything they hadn't said. It was annoying. It was one of the things she valued most about him. "Something involving Naruto," he said. She paused. "Why do you say that?" "Because you have that face you get when something is going to be complicated and you haven't decided yet how honest to be about it." He put his arm back. "And because the council sent a messenger to Kakashi-sensei's office 2 days ago, they were clumsy about it, wrong courier, wrong time of day. Naruto noticed." Temari sat very still. "Naruto noticed," she repeated. Shikamaru picked up the rice ball and took a bite. "He told me about it this morning, actually. Said he thought the Sand Council was gearing up for some kind of, his words, weird political move, and wanted me to think about what it might look like." He chewed. "I've been lying here thinking about it for 3 hours. What did you tell him?" "Nothing yet." He glanced at her again. "I was waiting to see if my fiancée showed up 2 weeks early with dust in her hair and a specific kind of careful expression." The morning birds were very loud suddenly. Temari was aware of her own breathing. "I should have written more in that letter," she said quietly. "Yes," Shikamaru agreed. "He didn't say it with any heat, just factually the way he said most things." "Are you going to tell me what they sent you here to do?" "Not yet." She met his eye. "I need to think." He nodded like this was acceptable, like he'd expected it. "Take your time." A pause. "Naruto invited me to lunch at Ikaraku's at noon. I was going to go. You could come." She looked at him. "Shikamaru, you're going to end up talking to him one way or another," he said simply. "Might as well be over ramen while it's my idea." She thought about Ross's instructions. Develop proximity. He trusts people quickly. She thought about what she'd said to herself 2 nights ago about things that crack and get filled wrong. "Fine," she said. "Noon." Ikaraku's was busy for a Wednesday. It was always busy. She'd learned over the years. Because Naruto had essentially made it into a secondary social venue for half of Konoha's active shinobi roster through sheer repetition and enthusiasm. By the time she and Shikamaru arrived, there were already 3 other people at the counter, and the old man Tuchai was working at a pace that suggested he'd been doing this for years and had achieved a kind of cooking enlightenment. Naruto was already there. This was the part Temari had been quietly preparing herself for, without fully acknowledging she was doing it. She'd built a picture of him in her head, the version she'd need to approach, calibrate against, study. She'd reviewed what she knew. The Kyubai's Jinchuriki, war hero, the idiot who'd somehow punched his way through every impossible situation since he was 12 years old. Loud, optimistic to the point of delusion, easy to read. The man sitting at the Ikaraku counter turned when he heard Shikamaru's footstep on the wooden boards, and he looked at her directly, immediately at her, with blue eyes that were about 50% warmer and 50% sharper than any mental image she'd built, and he smiled like he'd been expecting her. "Temari," he said, "Shikamaru said you might be coming early." "He texted you," Temari said flatly, looking at Shikamaru. "I sent a note," Shikamaru said serenely. "I'm very traditional." Naruto laughed, actual genuine laughter, not performance, and it was louder than necessary and completely unself-conscious, and Temari sat down at the counter and reminded herself that warmth was not the same thing as transparency. "You look good," Naruto said. "Road travel agrees with you." "I look like I traveled for 2 days straight," she said. "Don't flatter people before you know what they want." His eyes flickered, just briefly, just for a fraction of a second, and there it was. There was the thing she'd been looking for, something underneath the warmth that was watchful, not hostile, not suspicious in the way of a man who'd been warned, just aware. "Fair enough," he said easily, and turned back to his ramen. Tuchai took her order without ceremony. She got the standard broth, no fuss, something she could eat with one hand while thinking. Shikamaru settled in on her other side and ordered with the efficiency of a man who had done this hundreds of times. For a few minutes they just ate. The lunch rush noise filled the space. Someone at the far end of the counter was arguing about a recent D-rank mission assignment with a level of passion that seemed disproportionate to the stakes. "So," Naruto said eventually, elbows on the counter, turning his bowl slightly in his hands the way she'd noticed he always did when he was comfortable. "How's Gaara?" "Tired," she said. It was the truest thing she could offer. Naruto made a small sound, not dismissive, understanding. "He writes to me sometimes, short letters. He always sounds tired in them." A pause. "The kind of tired that isn't about sleep." She looked at him despite herself. He was still looking at his bowl. "The village council gives him trouble?" he asked. She picked up her chopsticks. "Some of them are more interested in the village they remember than the one they have." Naruto nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get that." He glanced at her sideways, quick, easy, like it was just conversation. "Some of those same guys have been sending quiet messages to Konoha's old guard, trying to feel out, I don't know, what the landscape looks like, where the allegiances sit." Temari kept eating. "That could be normal diplomatic positioning," she said. "Sure," he agreed. "Could be." He drank some broth directly from the bowl. "Or it could be something else." She set her chopsticks down with a precision that cost her some effort. "What are you saying, Naruto?" He looked at her then, full on, no sideways glances, no casual deflection, and the smile he gave her wasn't the loud, broad one from when she'd arrived. It was quieter, more honest. "I'm saying," he said, "that it's really good you're here early, and I'm not asking any questions today because you just got off the road and that would be rude." He picked up his chopsticks again. "But I do want to spar tomorrow morning if you're up for it. Training ground 7, 6 in the morning. Bring the fan." She stared at him. He slurped his noodles. "Bring the fan," she repeated. "It's been a while since I've seen your full range," he said pleasantly. "I've been working on some things and I want to see how they hold up." Shikamaru, on her left, was being aggressively interested in his own bowl. Temari looked at the back of Naruto's head and thought about the word exploitable and felt something that she couldn't quite identify shift in her chest like a tectonic plate deciding to have opinions. He knows something, she thought, not everything, but something, and he's not alarmed by it. He's inviting her to spar. She picked up her chopsticks. "Fine," she said, 6 a.m. "Great." He was already finishing his second bowl. "Oh, and Temari," she looked up. "I'm really glad you came," he said. And it sounded, infuriatingly, like he meant every word of it. She went back to her in that evening and sat at the small desk by the window and thought for a long time. She thought about Rasa's instructions and Shikamaru's careful neutrality and the way Naruto's eyes had that watching quality underneath the warmth. She thought about the word neutralize, which no one had used in the chamber meeting but which had lived in the negative space of everything that was said. She thought about her brother, who hadn't been invited to the meeting where his sister was assigned. Then she took out a blank sheet of paper and wrote the first report for the council. Subject arrived early to Konoha without incident. Initial contact established. Subject is more politically aware than anticipated. Further assessment required. She stared at that last line. Further assessment required. She was already hedging, and she hadn't even seen him fight yet. She sealed it and set it aside and went to bed and did not sleep well. The training ground at 6 in the morning was cold and silver-gray with mist coming off the trees, and Naruto was already there when she arrived, which she noted because she'd arrived 7 minutes early. He was sitting on a log at the edge of the clearing, eating a rice ball. She was beginning to understand that he ate constantly, with the metabolic enthusiasm of someone whose body was continuously rebuilding itself. And he looked entirely awake, which she respected even if it was inconvenient. He looked up when she walked out of the tree line with her fan across her shoulder. "Morning," he said. "You were here before me," she said. "I was up early." He stood, tossed the wrapper of the rice ball into a bag at the base of the log, rolled his shoulders. He was wearing his standard training gear, nothing special, nothing performative. "You want to warm up first or just go?" She unslung the fan and braced it against the ground. "I want to know what this is actually about." He looked at her, held it for a moment. Then he smiled, not the broad one, not the quiet, honest one from yesterday, but something in between. Something that looked like respect acknowledging itself. "Okay," he said, "both things can be true. I want to see how your wind style holds up against what I've been developing, and I want to talk to you somewhere that isn't Ikaraku's with Shikamaru doing his pretending not to listen thing." He rolled his neck. I know your council sent you here for a reason, Temari. I don't know exactly what it is. I'm not going to pretend I don't know, but I'm also not going to make it into a confrontation before I know what you want." He settled into a stance. "So, let's spar and let's see what happens." She stared at him. "You're a strange person," she said. "I get that a lot." He grinned. "Ready?" She raised the fan. The first exchange was fast. She opened with a C-rank wind burst to test his reflexes, and he was already in motion before the air had fully gathered, moving laterally with a speed that made her recalibrate. He wasn't just fast in the Naruto-shaped way she remembered from the Chunin exams or even from the war. He was precise now, economical, like someone who'd learned that power didn't require spectacle. She shifted to a pressure technique, driving a compressed column of air at low altitude to disrupt his footing. And he did something unexpected. He rode it. She watched him take the impact through his legs and redirect it, spinning out of the pressure zone and using the momentum to close distance in a single second. She blocked with the fan's frame, took a step back. "Wind chakra absorption," she said, "kind of still working on it." He wasn't even breathing hard. She set her jaw and opened the fan to its full width. For the next 20 minutes she threw everything at him short of her A-rank techniques, and he answered each of it, not always blocking, sometimes deflecting, sometimes absorbing, once doing something with shadow clones that shouldn't have worked geometrically but absolutely did. She was working, actually working. Her shoulders burned and she was generating serious airflow, and he was grinning, that familiar enormous grin, but his eyes were completely focused. Eventually she stepped back and they both breathed for a moment. "You've gotten better," she said. "You've gotten scarier," he said, and it was a genuine compliment delivered without strategy. She lowered the fan and looked at him and said, "What do you want to know?" He sat back down on the log, just like that. No triumph in it, no gloating that the spar had led here. Just settling in like they were continuing a conversation that had always been going. "Is it just intel gathering?" he asked. "Or is there more to it?" She looked at him for a long time. She thought about Rasa. She thought about the word finesse. She thought about her brother not being invited to the meeting. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "They didn't tell me everything." He nodded slowly. "Okay," a pause. "Are you going to tell me when you find out?" She laughed, short, sharp, surprised out of her. She hadn't meant to. His expression shifted into something that looked genuinely pleased. "I don't know that either," she said. "Okay," he said again. He stood up. "Same time tomorrow." She slung the fan back onto her shoulder. "Don't push it. Too late. I'm definitely pushing it." He started walking toward the tree line. "There's a really good breakfast place 2 streets over from the inn you're staying at, by the way. Miso and egg rice. Opens at 7. She stopped. "How do you know what inn I'm staying at?" "I'm going to be Hawkage someday, Temari." He didn't look back. "I know everything that happens in this village." And then at the edge of the trees, or at least I ask the right people. He disappeared into the mist, and Temari stood in the training ground with the cool air moving around her and her arms still burning from the spar, and something turning over quietly in the back of her mind. "I don't know yet." That was what she'd said, and it had been the first completely honest sentence she'd spoken since she'd opened that scroll before dawn 2 days ago in Suna. She walked back to the inn. She ate the miso and egg rice at the place 2 streets over. It was infuriatingly excellent. And she sat with her tea and thought about what it would mean to know something and say it and have someone nod and say okay and mean it without conditions. She thought about it for a long time. Chapter 2. The closest distance. The coordination meetings began on a Tuesday. Temari had been in Konoha for 9 days by then, which meant she'd sparred with Naruto 6 times. Eaten at Ikaraku's 4 times, sat through 2 evenings at the Nara compound with Shikamaru's mother giving her the specific kind of evaluating silence that Yoshino Nara had perfected over decades of watching her son bring interesting problems home, and written 3 reports to the Sand Council that said progressively less while sounding progressively more thorough. She was good at that. She'd always been good at that. The meetings were held in the Hawkage Tower's main conference room, a large, well-lit space that always smelled faintly of paper and ink, and the particular bureaucratic tension of people who needed to agree on things but had different reasons for wanting to. Representatives from Sand, Mist, Cloud, and a small stone delegation sat around a long table. Kakashi, still technically Hokage in title, while Naruto finished his formal qualification period, presided with the energy of a man who found paperwork philosophically offensive but had made peace with necessity. Naruto sat to Kakashi's left, not at the head, not officially his seat yet, but close enough that anyone paying attention understood where the gravity was. Temari sat across the table from him as part of the Sand delegation, which consisted of herself, a junior attaché named Baki who was mostly there to take notes, and a trade representative called Soroi who Rasa had inserted into the delegation with the explanation that the financial discussions warranted direct representation. Soroi was Rasa's man. She'd clocked that the moment she'd seen his file, he sat at the far end of the Sand grouping and smiled at appropriate moments and said nothing that wasn't carefully pre-approved, which meant he was primarily there to watch her. She found this mildly insulting, which meant the council trusted her precisely as much as she'd expected. The first day covered border administrative protocols, the new joint checkpoint system that Konoha and Sand had been slowly constructing since the war's end. It was necessary work and also profoundly unexciting, and Temari spent most of it contributing precise, competent input while managing the background awareness of Naruto, sitting 12 feet away making the occasional note, occasionally leaning over to say something quietly to Kakashi, occasionally catching her eye from across the table with an expression that communicated absolutely nothing specific and everything in general. He was very good at that. She was starting to understand that it wasn't an accident. During the mid-morning break, when people drifted toward the tea and the windows and the necessary small talk of diplomatic proximity, she found herself standing near the east-facing window looking out at the village below. The Hokage mountain was visible from here, the carved faces of the previous Hokages, stone and permanent and watching, with the new face at the end that was still being finished. Minato Namikaze's face, Naruto's father. She'd always thought the timing of that addition was interesting. "Specific shade of green," Naruto said, appearing at her left with 2 cups of tea and offering her one. She took it. "What?" "The trees in the valley below the north gate. That specific color. I used to come up here when I was a kid and stare at it." He drank his tea. "Not a lot of that color in Suna. Not a lot of anything green in Suna," she said. "Do you miss it when you're here?" She thought about it. "I miss the quiet," she said. "The desert is very quiet in the way that open space is quiet. Konoha is quiet in a completely different way, like something is always about to move." He nodded. "Yeah, that's good. That's an accurate description." He glanced at her. "You're pretty good at accurate descriptions. It's a useful skill in a lot of fields." He said it without any edge, and she heard the edge in it anyway, because she was looking for it. He smiled at the window. "Soroi seems like an interesting guy. He represents Sand's trade interests," she said. "Right." A pause. "He keeps looking at you. He's thorough." "Sure." Naruto finished his tea. "Kakashi wants to push the water rights discussion to tomorrow. That going to work for your delegation?" "I'll confirm." She looked at him. "That's what you came over here to tell me?" "Mostly." He took her empty cup, because apparently that was a thing he did, and turned back toward the room. "Also, the tea on the left side of the table is better. Someone brought it from the Yamanaka shop, just so you know for next time." He was already walking back to his seat. She watched him go and thought about the word proximity and how it was doing something it wasn't supposed to be doing. The evenings were more complicated than the meetings. Konoha's social architecture was dense and interconnected in ways that Suna's wasn't, a function, she suspected, of being a village that had always had enough people that informal networks could sustain themselves. In Suna, you knew your neighbors because the desert forced it. In Konoha, you knew your neighbors because there were enough of them that not knowing felt like an active choice. The result was that the post-meeting hours were filled with the kind of casual collective socializing that was genuinely social, not performative. Konoha's active shinobi roster seemed to operate on the assumption that anyone loosely connected to anyone they knew was also their business. This meant Temari kept ending up in rooms with people she hadn't planned to be in rooms with. On the third evening, it was a terrace gathering at Ino Yamanaka's family compound, allegedly a post-meeting decompression event. Actually, about 30 people of varying rank and affiliation, eating good food and arguing about everything from mission policy to who made the best dango in the Fire Country. Temari went because Shikamaru was going, and it was better cover than sitting alone at the inn writing carefully incomplete reports. She arrived to find Naruto already deep in an argument with Rock Lee about training methodology. Sakura Haruno refereeing with the expression of someone who had done this 1,000 times and found it roughly 40% annoying and 60% endearing, and Ino herself overseeing the food distribution with the precision of a general who had decided catering was her current battlefield. Shikamaru disappeared almost immediately toward a corner with Choji, the two of them establishing their own gravity the way they always did. Temari got a drink and stood at the terrace railing and looked at the village in the evening light. "You always do that," said a voice. She turned. Sakura had detached from the Naruto debate. Apparently it had reached a stage where it could sustain itself and was leaning against the railing 2 feet away, cup of something warm in both hands. "Do what?" Temari asked. "Stand at the edge and watch," Sakura said, not accusatory, observational. "You did it at the war camp briefings too. You always find the highest ground in a room." "Old habit," Temari shrugged. "Wind users like elevation." "Sure." Sakura drank, paused. "How's Gaara? Everyone keeps asking me that." "He's worth asking about." Temari's mouth almost curved. "He's tired, he's managing, he's better than he was and not as good as he deserves to be." She looked out at the village. "He sends his regards, by the way. He said to tell you specifically that he appreciated what you did in the war." Sakura was quiet for a moment. "Tell him it was nothing. He'll disagree." "That's fine, he can disagree." She glanced sideways at Temari. "You're being careful." Temari looked at her. "What?" "Careful," Sakura repeated. "In conversation, in the meetings, with Naruto." She said it without any accusation, with the tone of someone naming a weather pattern. "I've known Naruto for a long time, long enough to notice when he's paying a particular kind of attention to someone. And he's paying it to you." She didn't say it like a warning or a judgment. She just said it like information. "I thought you should know." "Thank you," Temari said carefully. "Also," Sakura added, looking back at her drink, "whatever is going on, and I'm not asking because it's not my place, Naruto can handle it. He's handled worse than whatever you're thinking right now." She pushed off the railing. "The yakitori at the far table is better than the stuff at the front. Ino's dad made the marinade." She walked away with the same matter-of-fact ease with which she'd arrived. Temari stood at the railing for another minute. Then she went and got the better yakitori and stood near the argument about dango and ate and thought about the particular problem of being surrounded by people who were each, in their own way, smarter about people than she'd accounted for. Halfway through the evening, Naruto found her. Not dramatically, not with any event preceding it. He just materialized at her side the way he'd done at the meeting window, holding a piece of dango and looking mildly triumphant about it. "Mitarashi wins," he announced. "The argument, Mitarashi dango is definitively the best." "I wasn't part of that argument." "No, but you were listening to it." He offered her part of the dango stick, which was a somewhat presumptuous gesture that she accepted because she was hungry and the dango was in fact very good. "Sakura talked to you." She looked at him. "Is everyone in this village reporting to you?" "Number," he grinned. "She just has a look she gets, and you have a look you get when you've just been told something you didn't expect." "And what look do I have right now?" He looked at her with that quiet assessment and said, "The one where you're deciding whether to be annoyed or impressed." She ate the rest of the dango. "Both," she decided. He laughed, genuine and loud, and 2 people nearby turned to look. He didn't moderate it at all. She'd stopped being surprised by that. They stood there for a while, not saying much, watching the terrace party do its thing around them. It was comfortable in a way she hadn't budgeted for. That was the problem. She'd prepared for the version of Naruto who was easy to categorize, the open book, the uncomplicated hero, the loud optimist who wore his heart so prominently that you could navigate around it. She hadn't prepared for this. Someone who was genuinely warm and genuinely watching, who could read a room without seeming to look at it, who could stand in companionable silence with someone he had clear reasons to be wary of and seem, somehow, like he'd already decided the wariness wasn't the most interesting thing available. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. Why aren't you more suspicious of me?" He looked at her, tilted his head slightly. Who says I'm not? The way you act. I can be suspicious and still, he seemed to search for the right word, found it. Interested. Interested, she repeated, in what you're actually thinking. He looked back out at the party. There's a version of this situation where I assume the worst and treat you accordingly and probably end up being right in a narrow way and missing everything important. He shrugged, one shoulder easy. I've done that before, it doesn't go great. She thought about that. And the other version, wait and see. He glanced at her sideways. You came here for a reason your counsel gave you, but you're still here with your own reasons inside that. I'm more interested in the inside ones. She was quiet. That's a strategic risk, she said finally. Most good things are. He finished whatever he was eating and stretched both arms above his head with the total physicality of someone who lived comfortably in their body. Same time tomorrow, training ground. You said you'd stop pushing it. I said don't push it and you didn't say yes or number. He looked entirely unrepentant. I'm interpreting that as a standing invitation. She pointed at him. You're insufferable. Yeah, but I'm right. He grinned and wandered off toward Lee and the resumed Dango argument. And she watched him go with the specific frustration of someone who has been outmaneuvered by someone who wasn't even trying to outmaneuver them. She went to the training ground the next morning. This time they didn't spar immediately. Naruto was running solo drills when she arrived, advanced chakra work, something she didn't recognize, a technique that seemed to involve distributing his energy outward in a radius rather than concentrating it into a strike. He noticed her arrive but finished what he was doing before acknowledging it, which she respected. New technique, she asked. Modified sensory extension, combined with the sage stuff. He dropped out of the stance. Basically, I can feel chakra signatures in a pretty wide radius, useful for knowing what's in a space. A beat. Very useful. She set her fan down against the training post. You used it during our first spar. Second, he corrected. The first one I was mostly just reacting. By the second one I was reading ahead. That's how you knew where the pressure columns were going. That's how I knew where the pressure columns were going. He said it simply, not as a boast. You push air in patterns based on your footing. Your right foot turns out by about 3 degrees when you're setting up a high-pressure A rank. I noticed it by the fourth exchange. She stared at him. No one has ever noticed that. I notice things, he said, and then, just as straightforwardly, you do too. You noticed the cloud cover shifting during the war, the afternoon before the second Zetsu wave, and repositioned the Sand Battalion 40 minutes before the rest of us understood what was coming. Saved about 60 lives. He looked at her. I pay attention to people who pay attention. The air in the training ground was very still for a moment. Where did you read that? She asked quietly. War debrief reports. I read all of them. He picked up his water bottle. After the war, he meant, when it was over and the cost was final and everyone was counting. I wanted to understand what happened, all of it. She looked at the training post. The wood was old and much repaired, new timber spliced into rotting sections over the years, bearing the record of thousands of strikes in its surface. 63, she said. What? 63 lives, the final count from that reposition. She'd looked it up too after. She'd needed the number to be real. The rest of the commanders thought I was overcorrecting. Kankuro argued with me for 12 minutes. You were right. I was right. She looked at him. Being right and being trusted aren't the same thing. Something moved in his expression. Not pity, nothing so simple, more like recognition, like she'd named something he also knew. No, he agreed, they're not. They trained for an hour. Not sparring exactly, more like collaborative testing, which was a distinction she would have dismissed as soft before and now understood as different. He showed her the sensory extension work. She showed him the precision mechanics of wind chakra compression that made her high-level techniques viable at close range rather than just open field. They were sharing, she realized. Genuinely sharing, not as a diplomatic courtesy, but because both of them were curious, and the curiosity was mutual, and neither of them saw any reason to pretend otherwise. It was the most honest she'd been in 2 weeks. Walking back through the village afterward, fan slung over her shoulder, she turned something over in her head. Rasa had called Naruto's trust his most exploitable characteristic. She'd written that down. She'd agreed with it. In the professional, clinical way, she agreed with accurate assessments. She was starting to understand that it wasn't accurate. Naruto's trust wasn't naive openness. It was a calculated bet. He trusted people not because he didn't see the risk, but because he'd decided the risk was worth taking more often than not. That was a different thing entirely. You couldn't exploit a calculated bet the same way you could exploit blind faith, because the person making the bet was watching the odds the whole time. She got back to the inn and sat at the desk and opened the council's secure communication channel. The latest message from Rasa was waiting. Brief, as always. Progress report requested. Soroi indicates subject interaction has been established. What is the nature of Uzumaki's current political planning? Specifically, any discussion of post-Hokage transition, power structure, allied village hierarchy, resource allocation agreements. She read it twice. Then she looked at the blank report form. She picked up the pen and wrote, "Subject continues to be assessed. No significant policy intelligence gathered. Social integration ongoing. Premature to push for substantive information without risking exposure." A pause. Recommend patience. She sealed it. Recommend patience. Rasa would hate that. He'd also accept it because she'd never given him reason to doubt her operational judgment before. She was using her credibility to buy time, she realized. Time for what? She hadn't fully articulated to herself. She went to the coordination meeting that afternoon and sat across from Naruto and watched him navigate a tense discussion about resource protocols with the fluid confidence of someone who understood that the goal wasn't to win the argument, but to find the shape of an agreement that everyone could walk away from intact. He was good at it, unexpectedly good, in the way that someone is unexpectedly good at something when you've been carrying the wrong impression of them for years. At one point, the Stone delegation representative made a pointed comment about Konoha's wartime resource seizures. A touchy subject, historically loaded, the kind of thing that could derail 3 days of work in a single bad minute. Temari watched Naruto absorb it, sit with it for 2 full seconds, and then say, "You're right, we got that wrong. Here's what we're proposing to correct it," and lay out a specific, concrete redress plan that Kakashi clearly hadn't been briefed on but rolled with because he'd apparently learned to trust Naruto's improvisations. The Stone representative blinked, then nodded. The moment dissolved. Shikamaru, sitting next to Temari as the Konoha strategic advisor, leaned very slightly in her direction and murmured, barely audible, "He does that." "Does what?" "Takes the hit, so the argument stops being about who's right and starts being about what's next." A pause. "Drives the old guard crazy. They want him to defend." She watched Naruto across the table as the meeting continued. That's not exploitable, she thought. That's not a weakness at all. She wrote nothing to Rasa that evening. Instead, she went to Shikamaru's compound and sat in his back garden in the dark and told him more than she'd meant to. Not everything. Not yet, but enough. She told him about the chamber meeting, the council's framing, the word finesse, the implication underneath it. Shikamaru listened the way he always listened, completely still, eyes half closed, giving the impression of inattention that was so total it had to be deliberate. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "How much do you trust Naruto?" she asked him finally. "With my life," he said immediately, "without qualification." That's a strong answer. It's an accurate one. He opened his eyes fully. "He carried me out of a collapsed building during the war, after I'd been hit by a technique that should have paralyzed me for a week. He carried me for 6 kilometers while simultaneously holding off 2 attackers." A pause. "And then when I tried to thank him, he told me to stop being weird about it." Something that wasn't quite a smile crossed his face. "Yeah, I trust him." Temari looked at the stars over the desert of her memory and the trees of Konoha's reality. "The council thinks he's a structural threat," she said. "They think Konoha is consolidating and Naruto is the engine of it." "They're not entirely wrong about what's happening," Shikamaru said carefully. "The world is reshaping. Konoha has advantages, but the intent," he paused. "Naruto doesn't want to dominate anyone. He wants everyone to be okay. Genuinely okay. It sounds stupid when you say it out loud, but it's actually what drives him." Another pause. "Which, yes, is still a form of power, but the kind that doesn't destroy things to get what it wants." She sat with that. "I haven't told him everything," she said. "I know. I'm going to." She said it before she'd fully decided it, and then felt the decision solidify around the words like fast-drying resin. "Not because I'm compromised." Because you think it's the right call, Shikamaru said. She looked at him. He was looking at the sky. You're not angry, she said. About what? You took an assignment you couldn't refuse from people who hold significant leverage over your brother's position. You've been managing it as carefully as you can. He glanced at her. I'm not angry. I'm just waiting to see what you decide. She breathed out. You're exhausting. You've said that before. It keeps being true. He almost smiled. Tell him tomorrow, training ground. She nodded, looked at the sky. Tell me it won't go badly. He was quiet for a moment. It won't go the way you're afraid it will, he said finally, but I can't promise it'll be easy. She hadn't asked for easy. She didn't know why she was asking for reassurance at all, which was itself information. She went to sleep thinking about 63 lives and 3 degrees of foot angle and a man who took hits so arguments could move forward. The morning mist was thicker than usual, and Naruto was standing in the middle of training ground 7 with his hands in his pockets, looking like he'd been there for a while. Not doing drills, just standing. She'd never seen him just stand before. He was usually in motion, generating momentum the way a warm front generates weather. But he was still this morning, waiting. She walked into the clearing and stopped 10 feet from him. He looked at her, said nothing. The council sent me here to get close to you, she said. Develop proximity, gather intelligence on your political planning and your relationships with other villages' key figures. Use my connection to Shikamaru as cover. Report back through Sora. She held his gaze. That's the assignment. The mist moved around them. A bird called somewhere in the trees. Is there more? He asked quietly. She thought about Ross's words. Someone less suited to the task. Someone who might handle things with less finesse. I think so, she said. I don't know the full shape of it yet, but I think the intelligence gathering isn't the end point. He was still for another moment. Then he nodded slowly once, the way he'd nodded when she'd told him about the 63 lives, like the truth was something you acknowledged with your whole body. Okay, he said. She stared at him. That's it, okay. What do you want me to say? He didn't sound angry. He sounded focused, the way he'd sounded during their sparring when he was reading ahead. You just told me the truth when you didn't have to. You're telling me because you've decided something. He looked at her carefully. What have you decided? The mist was very cold on her face. I don't know yet, she said, but I think I'm done writing incomplete reports. Something shifted in his expression, something that was relief and respect in equal measure, though it moved through his face so quickly she almost missed it. Good, he said. He pulled his hands out of his pockets. Then let's talk, and then let's train. And then he paused. I think we need to figure out what your council is actually planning, because I don't think it stops at intelligence gathering either, and 2 people reading that problem is better than 1. She unsung her fan. You're not even a little bit rattled by this, she said. Oh, I'm rattled. He tilted his head. I'm just not going to let that be the most useful thing I do with the information. He settled into a stance. Besides, you came and told me. That changes everything. She raised the fan, and the morning air moved between them, carrying the smell of trees and coming rain, and for the first time since she'd opened that scroll in Suna, she felt something clear. Not certain, not resolved, just clear. That would do for now. Chapter 3. Sand in the Mechanism. The document was 14 pages long and written in a cipher that hadn't been used officially since the Second Shinobi War. Temari found it on the 12th day of her stay in Konoha, tucked inside a routine logistics report that Sora had placed in the shared sand delegation folder with the explanation that it contained updated trade route assessments. She'd almost missed it, but not quite, because she had the particular habit of reading everything twice, and Sora had been slightly too casual about handing it over, his eyes moving to her face a half-second too quickly after he set it down. She took the folder back to her inn, locked the door, closed the shutters, and cracked the cipher in 40 minutes using the key she'd memorized during her Jonin promotion training because her father had insisted and she'd never questioned it. By the time she finished reading, her tea was cold and her hands were very still on the table. The document wasn't a trade assessment. It was an operational framework. 16 paragraphs of dense, careful planning language that described, in the bloodless vocabulary of mission briefings, a coordinated effort to destabilize Konoha's political transition. Not through war, through architecture, through the careful, patient placement of pressure on specific joints in the structure. The first phase was intelligence. That was her. She understood that clearly now, her role named not by title but by function, proximity operative, primary social vector. The second phase was financial. Existing agreements between Sand and several of Konoha's smaller allied settlements were to be quietly renegotiated, not broken, just made slightly worse, slightly more conditional in ways that would erode Konoha's peripheral support without triggering any single dramatic break. Like loosening bolts, nothing falls immediately. But eventually the structure shifts. The third phase was the one that made her sit very still. It was described in 4 paragraphs. It referenced an external contractor group, not named, referred to only as the mechanism, that had been engaged to provide what the document called terminal resolution capability if the first 2 phases failed to achieve sufficient disruption within the target window. Terminal resolution. The language was technical and careful and completely unambiguous. They weren't just trying to manage Naruto politically. If the politics didn't work, they were going to kill him. She read those 4 paragraphs 3 times. Then she folded the document precisely, put it inside her shirt against her skin, and sat at the desk and stared at the wall for approximately 2 minutes, which was as long as she allowed herself. Then she went to find Naruto. He wasn't at the training ground. It was mid-afternoon, wrong time. She checked Ikaraku's, the Hokage Tower's secondary entrance where he sometimes took meetings that weren't on Kakashi's official schedule, and the Nara compound on the off chance Shikamaru had drawn him there. Nothing. She found him, finally, on the roof of the administrative building, which apparently was a place he went. She didn't ask how she knew this. She'd been paying attention to his patterns for 12 days, and the roof was where he went when he needed to think without walls around him. He was sitting on the edge with his legs hanging over, looking at the mountain. The afternoon light was coming in low and golden, and it caught the stone faces of the Hokage Memorial in a way that made them look less like carvings and more like memory. He heard her coming. She didn't try to conceal herself. There was no point, and glanced back without surprise. "Hey!" He read her face in 1 second, and his posture shifted. Not alarm exactly. Readiness. "What happened?" She sat down beside him on the edge, pulled the document from inside her shirt, and handed it to him without preamble. He read it. She watched him read it, which was more informative than reading it a 4th time herself. His face went through several things: focused attention, recognition of the cipher style, the specific stillness that meant he'd hit something significant, and then at the 3rd phase, a very brief expression that wasn't fear but was adjacent to something real and human before it locked down into something else. He finished, folded it the same way she had. "How long have you had this?" he asked. 2 hours. He nodded, looked at the mountain. "The mechanism. You know what that is?" Number the document doesn't name them, but the phrasing, external contractor, that's how the old guard refers to groups that are deniable, not village-affiliated, mercenary networks. She watched his profile. "There are 3 active ones I know of that operate at that level. 2 dissolved after the war. The 3rd, Takigawa's remnants," he said quietly. She looked at him sharply. "You know them." "I know of them. Kakashi's been tracking movement in their network for about 3 weeks. We thought it was unrelated." He turned the folded document over in his hands. "It's not unrelated." "No," she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. The village noise came up from below, distant, ordinary, the sound of a city that didn't know any of this. She'd always found that dissonance strange, how loud peace was when you were sitting at the edge of something dangerous. "Rasa," he said, not a question. "Leading the council faction, yes. The other members, I identified 3 in the chamber meeting. There may be more." She paused. "Gaara doesn't know. They specifically excluded him." Something crossed Naruto's face at that. Hard and fast and gone. "Of course they did," he exhaled. "Of course." "They used his position against him," she said. "He's the Kazekage. If he knew and didn't report it, he's complicit. If he knew and did report it, he's turned against his own council. Either way, they constrain him." She heard the anger in her own voice and didn't moderate it. "They've been managing him since he took office. Every significant decision, they find a way to box him in." "He knows," Naruto said quietly. "Knows what?" "That they do it. He wrote to me about it obliquely, the way Gaara writes about things that bother him, but I understood it." He looked at her. "He's not naive about his own counsel. But knowing and being able to move against it are different problems." "He needs them," she said. The old clans, the founding families, without their cooperation, the Kazekage office can't function. It's structural. Yeah, he looked back at the mountain. Then he said, "You could have not showed me this." She met his look. "You could have kept it," he continued, "used it as insurance, or just buried it and gone back to writing careful reports that said nothing." His voice wasn't accusing, it was noting, recording. "Why didn't you?" "Because they want to kill you," she said flatly. "And I'm not," she stopped, started again. "I'm not going to be the reason that happens." He held her gaze. "Okay. Stop saying okay like it resolves things. It does resolve things. From my end." He stood up from the edge in one smooth motion and pocketed the document. "From your end, it probably resolves less and complicates more." She stood too. "That's a significant understatement." "I know." He turned to face her fully. This close, in the afternoon light, she could see the whisker marks on his cheeks, faint, old, like shadows the sun left there permanently. She'd stopped noticing them consciously around day 4, and then noticed she'd stopped noticing, which was its own kind of information. "I'm not going to move on this immediately. I need Kakashi in the loop tonight, and I need to figure out the mechanism angle before we do anything that makes the council think they've been exposed." "If they think they've been exposed, they'll accelerate," she said. "Exactly." He was already thinking through it, she could tell, the way his gaze went slightly inward, not unfocused, but turned toward something internal. "Which means we need to know the timeline. The document give any indicators. The target window phrase suggests weeks, not months. But there's no specific trigger date." She thought through it. "The financial phase may already be in motion. Some of the renegotiation language was present tense. Then we move carefully and we move soon." He looked at her again. "Can you keep going as normal? Meetings, reports, interaction with Sori, nothing changed on the surface?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'm not asking you to stay in a role you've already walked away from internally." "Naruto." She said his name with a precision that stopped him. "I'm a sand shinobi. I've been running information under pressure since I was 17. I can manage Soroi and write another week of deliberately useless reports in my sleep." She held his eyes. "What I can't manage is being the last person to know what you're planning." He was quiet for just a moment. Then, "Fair. You're in on everything from here." "Good." He started toward the roof access door and then stopped, turned back halfway. "Thank you," he said, "for coming to me." She looked at him with the afternoon behind her and said, "Don't thank me yet. The complicated part hasn't started." "It started the day you got here," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that wasn't entirely about the mission, and they both heard it and neither of them addressed it directly, which was perhaps the most honest thing either of them had done all day. He went downstairs first. She waited 5 minutes and then followed by a different route. Kakashi took the news with the composure of a man who had been receiving bad news at high velocity for his entire adult life and had developed a kind of philosophical relationship with it. He read the document at his desk while Naruto stood by the window and Temari sat in the chair that was not quite the visitor's chair. It was angled slightly wrong, like it had been placed for someone who wasn't officially there. "Takigawa," Kakashi said without looking up from the document. "That was my read," Naruto said. "Their active roster is approximately 30 operatives, combat-capable, adaptive, no particular ideological commitment. They'll work for anyone with sufficient payment and sufficient deniability." He set the document down. "They've been dormant since the war. This would be their first significant contract post-conflict." He looked at Temari. "You said you identified 3 council members. Who are the others beyond Rasa?" "Dama and 2 men I know only as the founding clan representatives. I'd need to cross-reference Sans clan registry to confirm their full identities." "I can get that," Kakashi said. "Carefully," Temari said. "Always." He looked at Naruto. "You understand this changes the political landscape significantly. If we move against Rasa's faction openly, it creates a crisis in Sans' leadership structure that could destabilize Gaara's position." "I know," Naruto said, "and if we don't move, I know that too." He wasn't dismissive, he was just ahead of the point. "Which is why we're not moving openly, not yet." He looked at Temari. "Gaara needs to know." She'd been thinking about this since she'd cracked the cipher. Telling Gaara means he has to act on it or suppress it. Either way, his position becomes precarious. Not if he knows before the council thinks he knows, Naruto said. If we can get information to him through a channel Rasa's faction doesn't monitor. His personal correspondence with you, she said immediately. It's the one channel they can't intercept without him knowing because he manages the security on it himself. She paused. They may not even be trying to intercept it. They think Gaara's out of this loop. So we use the gap, Naruto said. We use the gap, she agreed. Kakashi was watching this exchange with an expression she couldn't fully read, some combination of assessment and something quieter. He said the coordination meetings continue through next week. Sora will be watching for any behavioral change. He looked at Temari. How long can you sustain the cover? Indefinitely, she said. I've been doing this for 12 days. Another week is nothing. Kakashi nodded. Then here's what we do. He leaned forward. Temari continues as is. The reports to the council remain uninformative but plausible. Meanwhile, we begin building a picture of the mechanism's current positioning. I have 2 ANBU assets who have been tracking their network, and I'll redirect their focus tonight. He looked at Naruto. You maintain your existing schedule and behavior without any deviation that could be read as defensive positioning. I wasn't planning to hide, Naruto said. I know, I'm saying don't be more obvious about it than usual. A pause, which is already fairly obvious. I'll be exactly as obvious as I always am, Naruto said, and didn't seem to find that a criticism. Kakashi turned to Temari. The contact chain to Gaara, how long? 2 days if I use the personal channel. He'll respond within a day after that. Do it tomorrow. He stood. One more thing. He looked at them both, one after the other, with the particular gaze of someone who had known Naruto since he was a child and was making a specific evaluation. The council chose you for this assignment because of your pre-existing relationship with Konoha's shinobi. They assumed that was a tool. He picked up the document. Be aware that it's also a vulnerability, not yours, theirs. They've underestimated what existing relationships mean to the people in them. He walked to the filing cabinet and locked the document inside with a key he kept on his person. Get some sleep, he said, both of you. Outside the Hawkage Tower, the village was moving through its evening routines, shops pulling down awnings, the last of the day's foot traffic thinning toward dinner hours. Temari walked beside Naruto and they didn't speak for half a block. Kakashi is sharp, she said finally. The sharpest. No hesitation. He's been playing 4 levels ahead of most people for so long he sometimes forgets to tell anyone else what the levels are. Useful trait in a Hawkage. Infuriating trait in a teacher, but he said it with clear affection. He figured out the mechanism connection 3 weeks ago and didn't tell me because he was still calibrating whether I needed to know. Does that bother you? A little, he shrugged. Less than it used to. I used to want to know everything immediately. Now I understand there's a kind of information management that has to happen. It's not about trust, it's about timing. He glanced at her. Kind of like your reports to the council. She acknowledged that with a slight tilt of her head. Kind of like that. They reached the corner where their routes diverged, the inn in one direction, the Nara compound in another. Your brother, Naruto said. He stopped at the corner and looked at her. When you write to Gaara, how much do you tell him? She thought about it. Everything now. He's going to be angry. At the council, yes. At you too, for taking the assignment. She thought about this too, sitting at the desk with the cipher cracked and the cold tea. Probably, she met his look. He'll manage it. He always does. He's protective of you, Naruto said, not pushing it, just naming it. He's protective of everyone he cares about, she said. He didn't used to be. It's something he learned. She paused, like most good things. Naruto looked at her for a moment in the evening light. The street lamps were coming on one by one down the length of the road, and the shadows changed as each one lit, the darkness retreating and reforming. You doing okay? He asked, just that, direct and uncomplicated. It was such a straightforward question that she almost didn't know what to do with it. People asked how things were going or whether she needed anything or whether the mission parameters were clear. Nobody asked if she was okay with the blunt simplicity of someone who actually wanted the answer. I'm fine, she said, and meant it mostly, which was better than she'd expected. Okay, he didn't push. See you at the meeting tomorrow. Training ground after, he smiled. Thought you'd never ask. She walked back to the inn and wrote the letter to Gaara that she'd been composing in her head all day. It was long, longer than she usually wrote him, because Gara was someone you had to give full information to and trust him to process it on his own terms. She didn't cushion it. She told him about the chamber meeting, the document, the mechanism, the 3 phases. She told him she'd turned. She stared at that line for a moment. I've turned. It was the correct operational term, and it sat strangely on the page. She added, "This is the right call. I believe that. If you don't, tell me why and I'll listen. But I think you already know it is." She sealed it and set it aside for tomorrow's dispatch. Then she opened the council's communication channel and wrote a report so carefully unspecific that it was essentially meaningless. Subject: maintaining standard schedule. No significant policy movement observed. Coordination meetings proceeding normally. Recommend extended timeline for phase assessment. She sealed that too. Then she sat back and looked at both sealed letters side by side on the desk, and thought about which one was the lie and which one was the truth, and found that it wasn't even a difficult question. The next 2 days held a particular kind of tension that she'd experienced before, the charged stillness of an operation that was moving on multiple fronts simultaneously, where the surface had to stay smooth while the depths churned. She went to the meetings. She sat across from Naruto. She talked to Sori about trade protocols with the correct amount of professional engagement. She watched the room, filed faces, tracked patterns. Sori, she'd concluded by the end of the first week, was not a dangerous man. He was an obedient one, which was sometimes worse, because dangerous men at least had their own decision architecture. Obedient men did exactly what they were told and didn't trouble themselves with second-order effects. He confirmed something for her on the second evening without meaning to. They were leaving the meeting together, a coincidence of timing, and walking through the tower's main corridor when his communication device buzzed. He checked it, his face doing the thing faces do when information is unexpected, before he locked it down. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Fine," he said. "Administrative." She'd seen, for the half-second his face was open, 2 words on the small screen. Accelerate timeline. She maintained her composure with the professional ease of someone who had been trained to absorb shocks without transmitting them. They exchanged brief pleasantries at the building exit and separated in different directions. She found Naruto 40 minutes later, not at any of his usual locations. She found him because she'd started to understand his patterns well enough to extrapolate. When something required thought and motion simultaneously, he walked the upper residential roads of Konoha's northeast quarter, where the streets were steep and the houses were old and there wasn't much foot traffic. She'd noticed it on day 8 and stored it. He was exactly there. She fell into step beside him without greeting and said, "They're accelerating. The council sent Sori a message. 2 words, accelerate timeline." He kept walking. His pace didn't change. When? 20 minutes ago. Something triggered it. He was thinking out loud, which she'd noticed he did when he trusted who he was talking to. Either they've gotten new information or they've lost patience. He glanced at her. "Have you given them anything recently that might read as a stall?" The last report explicitly recommended extended timeline. "That could do it," he exhaled. "Rasa doesn't like stalls. He'd read that as either resistance or failure." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "We need the mechanism's position, tonight, before the council moves the timetable forward. Kakashi's ANBU assets, I already sent them a redirect 3 hours ago. I was expecting this." He said it without smugness, just factual. "I had 2 contingency reads on the council's patience threshold, and this was within both of them." She stared at him. "You were already ahead of this." "I was thinking about it," he said, which was apparently Naruto for yes. "I prepared for this 2 days ago and didn't mention it because I was still calibrating." She heard Kakashi's influence in that and wondered how much of Naruto's current strategic clarity was native and how much was years of that specific teacher. "The ANBU find a position?" she asked. "One of them flagged a safe house in the Lower East District 3 hours ago. 4 signatures. The mechanism's operational cells are typically 6 to 8 per contract, which means either they've split the team or they haven't fully arrived yet." He looked at her carefully. "I'm going to go look." She held his look. "Alone? I was thinking." "No," she said. "You're not going alone." He blinked. Whatever he'd been about to say recalibrated itself. "I wasn't trying to exclude you. I was thinking about the complications of Naruto." She said his name with the same precision as before. "I'm a Jonin. I've been in covert situations since I was a Chunin. You need a second set of eyes, and I need to know what we're dealing with before it's on top of us." She held his gaze. "Don't protect me from the thing I've been part of since I read that document." The street lamp above them hummed. Somewhere below, a cat moved through the shadows of someone's garden wall. "Okay," he said. And this time she heard something different in it, not dismissal or resolution, but something quieter, like respect landing in a specific place. "How far is the Lower East District?" she asked. 10 minutes. "Then we're wasting time." They moved. The Lower East District was the oldest part of Konoha's residential sprawl, streets narrower than the rest of the village, buildings pressed close, the architecture of a time before anyone had thought to plan for growth. It had the particular darkness of old places, where the buildings were tall enough and close enough that street lamps barely penetrated. The safe house was a 2-story building on a corner that looked like a disused storage facility, which it probably was officially. One lamp in an upper window, no visible exterior activity. They took separate high-approach routes and met on the rooftop of the building directly opposite. Temari crouched at the roof edge and extended her wind reading, a technique she'd spent years developing, using the subtle disturbance of air currents to map spaces she couldn't see directly. The building's interior gave back information in pressure differentials and the faint, warm disruption of bodies. 5, she said quietly. 3 upper floor, 2 lower. The upper 3 are close together, planning or sleep. The lower 2 are separated. She paused. One of the lower 2 has a significantly different chakra heat signature. "Different how?" he asked. "Denser, either enhanced constitution or—" She stopped. "Or what? Or they're running a chakra suppression technique to mask their actual level." She looked at him. "Which would mean they have at least one significant asset in that building, not standard contractor grade." His expression didn't change. "Can you get a directional read on the suppression signature?" She extended again, focused tighter. The wind told her things in the way it always had, through the spaces things left in it, the negative shapes. "Northeast corner, ground floor, small room, probably a storage annex." "Okay," he was very still beside her. "I want to know who that is." "So do I. I'm going in." "We're going in," she said. He looked at her for a second, then he nodded. No argument this time. They moved off the roof together, split at the corner, her taking the east wall approach, him taking the north, and converged on the building's rear access in under 2 minutes. The door was unlocked, which meant they either had very poor security consciousness or they had something inside that made the lock irrelevant. She suspected the latter. The interior was exactly what her wind reading had suggested, 2 floors. The upper occupied by sleepers whose presence she could feel through the ceiling. The lower divided into a central space and several smaller rooms. The 2 ground-floor occupants were in the central space, visible through a half-open door, reviewing something on a flat table. Neither of them looked up. Naruto touched her arm lightly, directing her attention to the northeast corner. She nodded. The storage annex door was closed. She felt the chakra suppression technique clearly now up close. It was expensive, that kind of sustained suppression. Whoever was inside was either very skilled or very important or both. Naruto opened the door. The room was small and dim. A single figure sat in the corner, cross-legged, eyes open, looking at them with the complete composure of someone who had heard them coming from the moment they entered the building and had decided to wait rather than respond. He was about 60. Lean, precise in his features, with the particular stillness of high-level shinobi who had resolved the relationship between readiness and rest into something seamless. He wore nondescript clothing, nothing to identify affiliation. But Temari knew him. She'd met him once, 3 years ago, at a summit that had been classified at the time. He was not a contractor. He was not mercenary rank. He was one of the most accomplished former ANBU operatives in the land of Wind's history. His name was Ryo, and he had been her father's personal enforcer for 15 years. He looked at her with dark, calm eyes and said in the particular voice of someone who had long ago made peace with saying difficult things, "Hello, Temari. I wondered when you'd figure it out." She felt Naruto go absolutely still beside her. "Figure what out?" she said. Her voice was level because she made it level. Ryo looked between them. "That this isn't about gathering intelligence," he said. "That it never was." He shifted his weight slightly, unhurried. You were the cover, Temari. The council needed someone inside Konoha who would give Uzumaki a reason to lower his guard. They weren't expecting you to turn. Something crossed his face, not quite admiration, but something in that family. Honestly, neither was I. How long have you been in Konoha? Naruto asked quietly. 6 days, Ryo said. We were supposed to wait for the signal. The message Sora received tonight was ours. He looked at Temari. I'm not going to fight you. I want you to understand that before this becomes something it doesn't need to be. She looked at the man who had guarded her father and thought about what that meant, what it said about the architecture of loyalty and who built it and who got to decide when it stood and when it fell. Then talk, she said, and the night got deeper around them. Chapter 4. The turn Ryo talked for 40 minutes. He sat in the corner of that dim storage room with his hands resting on his knees and spoke with the measured cadence of a man who had decided that honesty was the most efficient option available and was now executing it with the same precision he'd applied to everything else in a 40-year career. Temari stood near the door. Naruto leaned against the wall to her left. Neither of them interrupted much. The picture Ryo drew was larger and older than the document Temari had found. It started not with Rasa's faction, but with the war's aftermath, specifically with the resource assessments that followed the Fourth Shinobi War's conclusion. The Land of Wind had suffered disproportionate attrition, not just in lives, which were counted and mourned, but in infrastructure, trade capacity, and the particular kind of institutional knowledge that lived in senior shinobi and administrative personnel, and simply ceased to exist when those people didn't come home. Suna had emerged from the war technically victorious and practically diminished, and the men who ran its civilian council had watched Konoha's recovery with the specific resentment of people who believed they deserved better and couldn't articulate exactly who had failed to deliver it. Rasa had crystallized that resentment into something functional. Not immediately, he was too patient for that. Over 2 years, he'd built a coalition of old guard families and institutional conservatives who shared a specific fear. That the new order Naruto represented wasn't just Konoha's ascendance, but the permanent marginalization of every village that couldn't match its pace of recovery. It was, Ryo said, not an unreasonable fear on its face. It had simply arrived at an unreasonable solution. The mechanism, Naruto said when Ryo reached that part. Who activated the contract? Rasa personally, 8 weeks ago. Ryo's voice didn't change. I was brought in 4 weeks after that when the operational planning reached the stage that required my particular experience. As the primary asset, Temari said, as the coordinator. He looked at her steadily. I want to be precise about that. I have not taken a contract on Uzumaki. I have been managing the operational framework in which such a contract exists. That's a meaningful distinction, even if it doesn't sound like one. It sounds like semantics, she said. It's not semantics, it's the difference between a door and what's behind it. He held her gaze. I can give you the full mechanism roster, operational timeline, communication protocols, every piece of infrastructure Rasa's faction has built for this. Naruto pushed off the wall. Why? The question landed in the room and stayed there. Ryo looked at Naruto, really looked at him, in the way that people look at someone they've been studying from a distance and are now encountering as a reality. Because this is wrong, Ryo said, not strategically wrong, wrong. He shifted slightly. I spent 15 years protecting a Kazekage who made decisions I disagreed with. I did it because the office mattered more than my opinion. But there is a line between institutional loyalty and complicity in assassination, and I have spent 4 weeks standing on the wrong side of it because I told myself the line was further ahead than it was. Something moved in his face, old and tired. I have a threshold. I've reached it. Silence. Naruto looked at Ryo for a long moment and then said with no particular drama, Okay, talk. Temari watched the exchange and thought about thresholds, about where they were and who placed them, and whether you could know your own until you'd already crossed it. Ryo gave them everything. The full team composition, 6 operatives, the 4 others currently in an inn on the village's west side under commercial aliases. The communications cipher they were using with Sora. The trigger conditions, 3 specific events that would activate the contract, the first of which was Temari's cover being blown, the second of which was Kakashi initiating any formal diplomatic action against Sans Council, and the third of which was Naruto leaving Konoha's perimeter unaccompanied. "They've been watching the perimeter?" Naruto asked. "Since day 3 of the coordination meetings," Ryo confirmed. "There are 2 observers on each major route, rotating shifts." "I know about one of them," Naruto said. Temari glanced at him. He didn't elaborate, but from his expression she understood that Kakashi's ANBU assets had flagged more than just the safe house. "The financial phase," she said to Ryo. "How far advanced?" 3 of the 6 renegotiation moves have been initiated through third-party trade brokers, none of them directly traceable to Sans Council, all of them structured to read as market adjustment rather than deliberate pressure. He paused. "Reversible if someone acts on them before the secondary contract's close. The window is approximately 9 days. 9 days. She looked at Naruto. He was already calculating. "The 2 people in the central room," he said. "Mechanism, support personnel, logistics and communication. Neither of them is combat capable above mid-Chunin level." Ryo said it without apology. "They're not aware of my current conversation. They're going to need to not be aware of a lot of things for the next few days," Naruto said. He looked at Ryo. "Are you asking for protection?" "I'm asking for the opportunity to be useful." Ryo met his look. "I understand there's no reason you should trust me. I'm offering what I have and accepting whatever you decide to do with it." A pause. "Though I would note that keeping me in place within the mechanism structure, apparently still operational, gives you a conduit you wouldn't otherwise have." Naruto was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Temari. She understood what he was asking. He wasn't asking for permission. He was asking what she saw, whether she read Ryo as genuine, as someone whose threshold was real and not performed. She thought about her father's enforcer. 15 years. She'd been a child for most of that and a teenager for the rest of it. And Ryo had been a constant, not warm, never particularly warm, but constant in the way of something structural, present at every significant moment in the Kazekage security architecture. She'd never had reason to question his loyalty because it had never wavered visibly, which meant either this was the first time it had wavered or she was watching a performance. She looked at his hands. They were resting still on his knees, not folded, not braced, not positioned, just resting. It was the posture of someone who had genuinely set something down. "He's telling the truth," she said to Naruto. "His read on the council is accurate, and he wouldn't burn the mechanism contact unless he'd decided completely." Naruto nodded once. "Okay, you stay in place. You keep operating normally within their structure. But everything, every communication, every movement, every shift in the trigger conditions comes to us within 2 hours of happening." Ryo inclined his head. "And if I determine at any point that you've held something back," Naruto added, not loudly, not with any particular edge, "I'll pull you out of the field so fast your operational network won't know what closed." He said it with the casual precision of someone describing a fact about weather. "We understand each other." "We do," Ryo said. "They left the way they'd come in." The 2 support personnel in the central room never looked up. Outside, in the dark, narrow street, Temari breathed the cold air and let it settle something that had been keyed up since she'd seen Soroi's message. "You believe him," she said. "I believe you believe him," Naruto said, "which is good enough for now." He looked up at the sliver of sky visible between the close-pressed buildings. "Your read on people is better than you give it credit for." "I give it exactly the right credit." "You're modest about it," he said, "which isn't the same as accurate." She didn't argue the point because she was too busy processing. "The trigger conditions. If my cover is blown, then they move immediately, which means your cover can't be blown." He started walking. "Ross's faction is waiting for a signal that the operation is compromised before they accelerate, so as long as nothing reads as compromised, they're patient." "Rasa isn't patient," she said. "Soroi's message tonight was Ryo's people prompting movement, not Rasa's. The communication chain runs through the mechanism to Soroi as well as from the council to Soroi." Ryo confirmed it. He glanced at her. "We just separated 2 threads that looked like one." She worked through that. He was right. The accelerate timeline message hadn't been the council pushing the mechanism, it had been the mechanism establishing contact with the council's operative inside the delegation. "Inventory check. Are you still in position? They're making sure Sora is still operational, she said, which means they're uncertain about something. About me, she said, my reports have been deliberately thin. If the mechanism team noticed that and flagged it, we need to give them something, Naruto said. He said it without hesitation, which meant he'd arrived there before she had. Your next report needs to have actual intelligence in it. She stopped walking. He took 2 more steps and turned back. You want me to give the council real information, she said. Specific real information, he said, chosen by us, information that's true enough to be credible and structured to give us control of what they think they know. He held her gaze. Can you do that? She thought about what that meant. Not just technically, she could do it technically, she'd been doing something adjacent to it for 2 weeks, but in terms of what it required her to commit to. Deliberately feeding intelligence to the people who had sent her here. Turning her own role inside out so completely that she was now effectively a Konoha asset operating within a sand operation. If this ever came to light within sand without the full context, it would end her. She was aware of this. She was also aware that she'd effectively already made the decision when she'd handed Naruto the document on the roof. Yes, she said, what do we want them to think they know? He almost smiled, not the broad one, the quiet, honest one. Come on, Kakashi's going to want to be in this conversation. It was past midnight when they reached the Hokage Tower, but Kakashi was still in his office, which apparently was normal. He had 3 mission reports open on his desk, and a cup of tea that looked hours old, and the expression of a man who had long since made peace with night shift. He listened to the Ryo debrief without expression. When Naruto finished, Kakashi was quiet for 20 seconds, long enough that Temari counted it. The trigger conditions are the most important element, Kakashi said. If we can control those 3 events, we control their timeline, Naruto said, which means we control when this ends. Kakashi looked at Temari. The false intelligence feed. What's the most useful thing we can give them that's also true? She'd been thinking about this on the walk over. Naruto's planning timeline for the Hokage transition, she said. Specifically the timeline for the formal nomination ceremony. The council will want that because it tells them when Naruto's position becomes permanent and legally difficult to destabilize. Kakashi looked at Naruto. The ceremony is currently scheduled for 6 weeks from now, Naruto said. We move it. To when? Kakashi asked. 2 weeks. He said it like it was obvious. We accelerate the actual ceremony, we leak the original timeline through Temari's report, and we gain a 4-week window where the council thinks they have more time than they do. Kakashi tapped his pen on the desk. Moving the ceremony requires the Fire Daimyo's office to confirm. We'll call them tomorrow morning. Naruto sat down in the second chair, the one that was actually a visitor's chair. The Daimyo's been wanting to move the ceremony earlier anyway. He'll agree. You've discussed this with the daimyo, Kakashi asked. We've had conversations, Naruto said carefully. Kakashi looked at him for a moment. Sometimes I wonder how many conversations you're having that I don't know about. Fewer than you think, Naruto said. More than it seems. Kakashi turned back to Temari. The report! It needs to be formatted in your established style, same level of detail, same structural approach as your previous one so Rasa doesn't read a sudden change in quality as suspicious. I'll write it tonight, she said. Have it ready by morning. What about the financial phase? Kakashi asked. The 9-day window on the trade renegotiations. I need a list of the 3 brokers Ryo named, Naruto said. Their firm names, their contract identifiers, Ryo can provide those through Temari. Once I have them, I can get the Trade Ministry to initiate countermoves through the standard market correction process. Nothing dramatic. Just close the windows before the secondary contracts can activate. Temari looked at him. You can do that. The Hokage office has discretionary authority over the Fire country's trade agreements within certain thresholds, he said. Kakashi, technically, Kakashi agreed. I'll have the broker information from Ryo tomorrow, Temari said. She paused. He'll want to know the conduit is secure. Tell him to use your personal communication channel, Naruto said. The one you use with Gaara, it's the cleanest line available and Rasa's people aren't monitoring it. He looked at her. Has Gaara responded yet? Not yet, it's been a day. When he does, tell him to hold. Don't move against the council yet. We need them functional and in place for this to work. He held her gaze. Can he do that? Hold when he has cause to act, she said, against the people undermining his authority. She thought about her brother, the sand-colored patience of him, the stillness that wasn't passive but was something harder than aggression. Yes, he can hold. Good, Naruto leaned back. Okay, so. Tomorrow, Ryo provides broker information, Temari writes the report, I call the daimyo's office, Kakashi starts the countertrade process and redirects the ANBU assets to watch the 4 operatives at the West Side Inn. He looked at them both. The day after, we run normal. Meetings, social, all of it exactly as it's been. And the mechanism? Temari asked. They don't move while the trigger conditions are intact. We maintain those conditions. He stood up. They're going to wait for their window, and we're going to make sure the window never opens. She walked back to the inn alone at 1 in the morning and wrote the report. It took her an hour, which was longer than usual, because this one required actual care. She wrote it in her established style, the specific rhythms of her previous reports, the particular way she framed assessments, and laced through it the intelligence they'd chosen. Naruto's Hokage nomination ceremony date, listed as 6 weeks out, his current diplomatic focus, framed as primarily internal Konoha consolidation rather than external alliance building, which made him look less threatening, and 3 specific details about his planning meetings that were real enough to be checkable and innocuous enough to be harmless. The report was, she realized as she sealed it, a small piece of fiction assembled entirely from true things. That was the hardest kind to write and the easiest kind to believe. She slept 4 hours and was at the training ground at 6, not because she'd arranged it with Naruto, but because she needed to move. The body had its own requirements when the mind had been working at that pitch. He was there. She wasn't surprised. She was starting to understand that his presence at the training ground in the mornings was less about arrangement and more about the fact that they both, independently, arrived at the same place when they needed to think through motion. They didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. They just worked, she on her wind precision drills, him on the sensory extension technique she'd seen him developing. Parallel work, the same space, the specific companionable focus of people who were comfortable in each other's silence. Then she said, not looking at him, focused on the compression form in her hands, my report goes out this morning. I know. When Rasa reads it, he's going to feel like the operation is back on track. She released the compression, reset. That's going to feel strange. Does it already feel strange? She thought about it. It feels deliberate, she said, which is different. Yeah, he was doing something with his hands that she recognized as the chakra distribution spread for the sensory technique. Deliberate is better than strange. She reset her stance. The ceremony in 2 weeks. The daimyo will actually agree to that. He'll agree today, Naruto said, with the confidence of someone who knew the answer. You're very sure of that. The daimyo is 73 years old and has been watching the Hokage process since before I was born. He told me 2 months ago that he found the timeline, his word leisurely, he wants it done. Naruto almost smiled. Sometimes the most strategic thing is just knowing what people already want. She looked at him sideways. That's very Shikamaru of you, he laughed. Don't tell him that, his head's already a problem. She almost laughed too, which was information. They worked until 8. Coming off the training ground, towels over shoulders, heading toward the village proper, they passed a small food stand that was just opening. A woman Temari had seen before, mid-50s, the kind of efficient morning energy that suggested she'd been doing this for decades, setting out bowls and a big pot of miso with the movements of long habit. Naruto stopped. Breakfast! We have meetings in 2 hours. We have time for soup. He was already sitting down on the bench beside the stand. He looked up at her with the morning light behind him. Come on, sit down, eat something before the day gets complicated. She sat down. The soup was excellent dark miso, soft tofu, the particular richness of a broth that had been going since before dawn. She ate and watched the street wake up around them. A few people recognized Naruto and nodded or called greetings, which he returned with the easy familiarity of someone who knew his neighbors, not performance, just presence. Can I ask you something? He said, midway through his bowl. You're going to anyway. The assignment, he said. When they first gave it to you, what did you think? First real reaction, not the professional one. She considered the question and whether to answer it honestly and decided that she'd been doing honest things for 3 days now and there was no particular reason to stop. I thought it was insulting, she said, using my relationship with Shikamaru as cover, using the trust I'd built with Konoha people as an entry point. She drank some broth, and I thought, she paused. What? I thought they weren't wrong to be afraid, she said quietly. The council. Their fear is real even if their response is wrong. Sand has lost ground since the war. Gaara's position is genuinely constrained. The realignment of the shinobi world does have Konoha at its center. She looked at her bowl. Fear doesn't become stupid just because the response to it is. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said, it doesn't, but the response is still wrong. Yes, he set his bowl down. What they're afraid of, Konoha dominating everything, that's not what I want. It's not even what Konoha wants, not at a structural level. But I understand why it looks that way from the outside. He looked at the street. Being the biggest thing in the room and not wanting to use that the way big things usually do, that's not obvious from where they're standing. It's not, she agreed. Need to know you specifically to believe it. He looked at her. Is that what changed, getting to know me specifically? The question was direct and genuine and slightly unguarded in a way she'd noticed he occasionally allowed himself, not often, not carelessly, but in moments where the conversation had reached a pitch of honesty that made pretense feel like more work than it was worth. She met his look. Among other things, she said. The morning opened up between them for a second, not uncomfortable, just present. The kind of moment that has weight without requiring anything to happen in it. Then a voice behind them said, I've been looking for both of you for 20 minutes, and they turned to find Shikamaru standing in the street with a mission scroll under one arm and an expression that managed to be both entirely neutral and deeply communicative. We got breakfast, Naruto said. I see that. Shikamaru looked at Temari. Your report went through the Sand communication channel at 7 this morning. Sorry, acknowledged receipt at 7:14. He paused. He looked pleased. Good, she said. Kakashi got the daimyo's office on the line at 6:30. Shikamaru continued, sitting down uninvited on the end of the bench. The ceremony date has been moved. Confirmation comes through official channels this afternoon. He looked at Naruto. You want to tell me when you called the daimyo? Yesterday morning, Naruto said. Shikamaru absorbed this. Before or after the roof conversation? Before. A pause. So you already knew you were moving the ceremony before you had the mechanism information. I had a reasonable probability estimate that I'd need to at some point, Naruto said. I was getting ahead of it. Shikamaru looked at the sky with the expression of a man who had long since accepted that people he respected were occasionally going to be 2 steps ahead of him, and had found a way to be impressed without being annoyed. Troublesome, he said, which from him was a term of endearment. What else? Temari asked him. He handed her the mission scroll. She opened it. It was Gaara's response, forwarded through the Sand communication channel to Shikamaru's secure line, which Gaara apparently had access to, which was a sign of the specific texture of the 2 men's relationship. She read it. Gaara's letters were always spare. He wrote the way he thought, precisely, without ornamentation, in sentences that meant exactly what they said and nothing less. I know about Rasa, not the full architecture, less than you've told me, but I've known the direction for 8 months. I've been waiting for the structure to be clear enough to move against. Your letter gives me most of what I needed. Hold, you say. I'll hold, but not long. You turn the right direction. Don't doubt that. Tell Naruto I trust his read on this. Gee, she folded the letter. The last line sat in her chest in a particular way. Tell Naruto I trust his read on this. From Gaara, who trusted almost no one and never said it casually, this was a significant thing. She handed the letter to Naruto without comment. He read it. Something moved in his face when he hit the last line, something warm and real that he didn't moderate. Same time tomorrow, he said to Shikamaru. Planning session. We need the full team in the room. Yumi, Temari, Kakashi. Sakura, if she's available, her field intelligence read is useful. Sakura's always available when it matters, Shikamaru said. She says it's because she has no work-life balance, but actually she just doesn't want to miss anything. 6 a.m., Naruto said. He stood up, left money for the soup with the economy of someone who'd done it 100 times, and looked at Temari. Good report this morning. I know, she said. He smiled, broad and genuine, and walked toward the Hokage Tower. Shikamaru watched him go and then looked at Temari with an expression that was doing several things at once. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Shikamaru, I said nothing. He stood up. The meeting's at 6 a.m., which means I have tonight to sleep, and I intend to use it. He looked at her in the specific way he had. Are you okay? There was that question again, different voice, same essential inquiry. I'm operating, she said. That's not what I asked. She looked at the street where Naruto had gone, at the morning activity of a city that felt, and she acknowledged this only internally as a factual observation, like a place she'd been learning to read for 2 weeks and was starting to understand. I'm good, she said. It came out more honest than she'd intended. I'm actually good. Shikamaru nodded once. Okay. He tucked the mission scroll under his arm again. Don't be late tomorrow. When am I ever late? He gave her a look and walked away, and she sat alone on the breakfast bench in the morning sun for 1 more minute, drinking the last of the soup, watching the city move. The report was out. The ceremony date was moved. Ryo was in place. The financial windows were being closed. Gaara was holding. Naruto was 2 steps ahead of a problem that had been set in motion before he'd even been identified as the target. And he was moving through it with the specific kind of confidence that came not from certainty about outcomes, but from trust in the process of getting there. Further assessment required, she'd written in that first report, hedging before she'd understood what she was hedging against. She understood now. She didn't need further assessment. She left the bench and walked back toward the inn to prepare for the day's coordination meeting, and the morning light moved with her, and the wind that came through Konoha's trees was different from the desert wind she'd grown up with, less ancient, less patient, but no less real. She'd always been a wind user. She'd always known how to read where it was going. She thought she was starting to understand this particular wind. Chapter 5: The War Before the War. The planning session at 6 a.m. on Thursday became, by 7:15, the most productive hour Temari had spent in a conference room since the war. Kakashi's office was too small for 6 people, so they used the secondary briefing room 2 floors down, a sparse space with a long table, no windows, and the particular focused atmosphere of a room designed for problems rather than ceremony. Sakura arrived exactly on time with a mission dossier she'd apparently compiled overnight, which no one had asked her to do and everyone was grateful for. Shikamaru had a tactical map of Konoha's lower east district and the west side in already unrolled, and waited at the corners before anyone else sat down. Kakashi stood at the head of the table with his hands behind his back and the expression of someone conducting an orchestra that had been playing without a conductor and had gotten surprisingly far. Temari sat to Naruto's left. She'd stopped noticing when that had become her default position in group settings and decided the noticing was less important than the fact. Current status, Kakashi said. Ryo's information has been verified against the ANBU Assets Independent Observations. The 4 mechanism operatives at the West Side Inn are confirmed. They've been running passive surveillance on Naruto's standard movement routes since day 3 of the coordination meetings. He looked around the table. They're good, professional-grade, minimal signature. If we hadn't been specifically looking, we'd have missed the West Side team entirely. They're Ryo's people, Temari said. He trained them. He wouldn't put amateurs in the field. Which means they're also responsive to his direction, Naruto said. If Ryo tells them to stand down, they stand down. We're not there yet, Kakashi said. Standing them down prematurely alerts Rosa's faction that the mechanism has changed posture. The council is watching for exactly that kind of signal. He turned to the map. The trigger conditions are our primary management problem. We've secured 2 of the 3. Temari's cover is intact, and the official diplomatic channel between Konoha and Sand remains unactivated. The 3rd condition is the one I want to discuss. Naruto leaving the perimeter unaccompanied, Shikamaru said. I do that, Naruto said. I know you do that, Kakashi said, with the particular patience of someone who had been managing this specific problem for years. You leave the perimeter unaccompanied approximately 4 times a week for training, personal time, or what you describe as clearing my head, which I've accepted as a legitimate category despite its operational implications. I'm not stopping, Naruto said. I'm not asking you to stop. Kakashi held his look. I'm asking you to stop going alone. A pause. You want someone with me, Naruto said. Someone whose presence reads as casual. Not ANBU. Ryo confirmed the mechanism's observers are specifically watching for ANBU deployment near Naruto as a trigger indicator. If they see it, they read it as Konoha going defensive, which maps to Condition 1. Kakashi looked around the table. Someone already in his regular orbit, someone whose presence outside the perimeter wouldn't be remarkable. Everyone looked at Temari. She met the collective gaze with the composure of someone who had been waiting for this and had already decided her answer. "Fine," she said. "When? Starting today," Kakashi said. Naruto looked at her. "You don't have to, Naruto." She gave him the look that stopped mid-sentences. "I'm aware I don't have to, I'm choosing to." She turned back to Kakashi. Route parameters, his usual training routes, the northeast forest trail, the ridge path above the valley, anything he'd normally do. Kakashi set a small folded map on the table in front of her. The observers track his departure from the main gate. Once you're off the primary road and into the tree cover, you have more options. Sakura, who had been listening with the focused attention of someone filing everything, leaned forward. The mechanism's communication chain, Ryo to Sore. What's the protocol when Ryo reports that conditions remain stable? Twice daily, Temari said, morning and evening. Ryo sends a confirmation code through the cipher. Sore relays to the council. And if the code changes, if Ryo sends an alert code instead, what does the council do? Activates the contract, Temari said. Immediate authority to move. So the council's response time from alert to activation is probably under an hour, Temari said. Rosser is not the kind of man who leaves decisions in queues. Sakura nodded. Then the gap we're working with isn't the mechanism's deployment time. It's the communication lag between Ryo and the council. She looked at Kakashi. If we control Ryo's communication precisely enough, we control the council's clock. Yes, Kakashi said. He looked at her with the specific expression he reserved for people who had arrived at the right place through their own route. Which is why the next phase isn't defensive, it's directive. He looked at Naruto. We're going to give the council a reason to recall the mechanism, not expose the operation. Give them a reason to pull it back voluntarily. The room was quiet for a moment. What reason? Shikamaru asked. Gaara, Naruto said. Kakashi nodded. Gaara initiates a formal bilateral review of the post-war resource agreements through official channels, loudly on record. He folded his hands. From the council's perspective, a formal review initiated by the Kazekage himself addresses their core concern, Sand's position in the post-war realignment. It gives them a political win to point to, and it creates a situation in which activating an assassination contract becomes strategically counterproductive. Killing Naruto during an active diplomatic initiative turns Sand into the aggressor in the worst possible way. Temari worked through it. Rasa would read a formal review as evidence the intelligence operation is working. He'd think Temari's proximity to Naruto generated enough pressure to prompt Konoha toward concessions, and he'd want to protect that momentum rather than detonate it, Shikamaru said. He was nodding slowly. He pulls the mechanism back, temporarily, to see how the review plays out. Temporarily is enough, Naruto said. We don't need them permanently recalled. We need them recalled long enough for us to neutralize their operational infrastructure and get Rasa's faction formally documented. Documented how? Sakura asked. The cipher correspondence between Rasa and Sore, Temari said, and the operational framework document I found in the delegation folder. Both of those, combined with Ryo's testimony, are enough for a formal council action within Sand's legal structure. She looked at the table. Gaara can initiate an internal review once the mechanism is recalled and the immediate threat is removed. The council can be formally sanctioned under Sand's own governance code. No public incident, no intervillage crisis. They manage it internally, Kakashi said, which is the cleanest outcome. For everyone except Rasa, Shikamaru said. Rasa made his choices, Naruto said. It wasn't cold, it was just final. Temari looked at the tactical map, at the positions of the mechanism's team, at the routes in and out of Konoha, at the geometry of a problem that had been designed to be impossible to survive from the inside and was slowly being turned outside in. Gaara needs to initiate the formal review by tomorrow, she said. That gives the council time to receive it and process it before their next communication window with Ryo. Can Gara move that fast? Sakura asked. He's been waiting 8 months to move on this council, Temari said. He'll have the paperwork drafted in 2 hours. She wrote Gara the letter that afternoon, during the coordination meeting's lunch break, in the brief private window while Sora was occupied with the trade representative from Cloud, and the room's attention was redistributed. She wrote quickly and precisely. The plan, the timing, the specific formal mechanism Gara needed to invoke, Article 17 of the Land of Winds Post-War Governance Charter, the bilateral review clause. Gara would understand what it meant and what it was for. He always understood the architecture underneath the stated request. It was one of the things she'd always appreciated about him. Nothing needed to be explained twice. She sealed the letter in her pocket and returned to the meeting and answered 3 questions about checkpoint protocols with the professional completeness of someone who was entirely focused on checkpoint protocols. Sora caught her eye once during the afternoon session. She held his gaze with a slight nod, confirmation of continued presence, nothing more, and he looked away satisfied. She thought about what Ryo had said. You were the cover. She'd known it intellectually from the beginning and hadn't let it land properly. Now it had landed. She'd been the architecture of misdirection for a plan that had never really needed her to succeed, just needed her to be present and credible, and to provide enough surface area for other things to happen against. The interesting thing was that the plan had needed her for exactly what she'd ended up doing, just not in the direction Rasa had intended. The evening was warm, and the village moved through its familiar patterns, and Temari walked the long route back to the inn, taking the upper residential roads, giving herself time and motion to think. She was 2 blocks from the inn when she heard it, the specific frequency of displaced air that meant someone had moved faster than walking speed nearby and stopped. She stopped, too. The street was empty in both directions. The buildings were old here, close set, the kind of architecture that offered a lot of options for someone who wanted to be adjacent without being visible. "I know you're there," she said, not loudly, just clearly. A pause. Then a figure dropped from the roofline of the building to her right, light landing, controlled. The specific ease of someone who'd spent years dropping from heights. He was young, maybe 20, and dressed in the nondescript dark clothing she associated with the mechanism support tier from Ryo's description. He landed 6 feet in front of her and straightened up with an expression that was trying to be hard and landing closer to uncertain. "You've been reassessing," he said. She looked at him. "Is that a question or an accusation?" "Sora sent a note." He shifted his weight. "Said your reports have been thin, that you might be." "Sora reads reports," she said. "That's his function. I generate them. That's mine." She kept her posture completely relaxed. If Sora has concerns about operational methodology, he can raise them through the appropriate channel, which is not sending someone to stand on my street at 10 p.m. He hesitated. He was reading her, trying to anyway. She let him look. She was giving him nothing to find because there was nothing to find in her posture, her expression, her breathing. She'd been doing this since she was 17. This boy was maybe 4 years in. He just wanted confirmation, the young operative said. "That you're committed." "I've been running this operation for 2 weeks, she said. "I'm sitting in diplomatic meetings every day. I'm maintaining social proximity to the target. I'm writing regular reports." She let a very small edge into her voice, not anger, controlled impatience, the kind that communicated offense at the insinuation rather than alarm at the check. "Tell Sora if he wants a performance review, he should have it with Rasa directly, because I don't answer to Sora." The operative was quiet. "Anything else?" she asked. He shook his head, looked like he regretted the errand. "Then go away," she said. He went. She waited until his chakra signature was 2 blocks out before she moved. She went up through the building's side access, crossed 2 roof lines, descended on the far side, and took 3 extra turns before approaching the inn from a different direction. Counter-surveillance basic, the kind of thing you did automatically when something had told you the geometry of your situation had shifted. When she got inside, she sat at the desk and breathed for a moment. Sora was uncertain about her. That meant he was watching more carefully. It meant the comfortable period of thin reports being accepted on her credibility alone was closing. It also meant that the formal review from Gara needed to happen tomorrow, or the pressure would build in a direction that made things complicated. She got out the council communication channel and wrote a third report, this one the best she'd done yet. Specific, detailed, reassuring in its confidence. She gave them the Hawkage ceremony date as the headline. She layered in 2 accurate details about Naruto's foreign policy, planning that read as gathered intelligence, but were framed to make him seem like a figure consolidating internally rather than reaching outward. She included a line about Shikamaru's advisory role that was purely factual but positioned San's existing intelligence network, by implication, as deeply embedded. She wrote it to be read by a man who wanted to believe the operation was working. She wrote it so well she almost believed it herself. Then she sent a short message through the Gaara channel, tomorrow, early as possible. His response came back within 20 minutes. She'd started to understand that Gaara slept poorly and kept odd hours, and this meant their communication latency was essentially 0. Already drafted, sending at dawn. She sat back and looked at the ceiling. One more day. The morning arrived with clouds. Not the soft, promising clouds that suggested rain later. The dense, low-moving kind that turned the air gray and flat and gave Konoha the feeling of a city under a lid. Temari noticed the weather the way she always did, with the specific attention of someone whose primary technique was wind-dependent, cataloging conditions automatically. She was at the Hawkage Tower by 8, which was earlier than the coordination meeting required, because she wanted to be in position when Gaara's formal review notice arrived through official channels. Naruto was already there. Of course he was. He was in the main corridor on the 2nd floor, leaning against the wall outside the administrative office, eating from a bag of something, rice crackers, it looked like, with the patient energy of someone who had also gotten here early and made peace with the wait. "Clouds," he said when he saw her. "I noticed," she said. "You get that look." "What look?" "The one where you're reading the air." He offered her the bag of rice crackers. She took 2 because she'd left the inn without breakfast. Gaara sent the formal review notice at 5:40 a.m. Kakashi's people received it at 5:53. "It's being processed now," she chewed. "Fast." He said he'd had the draft ready. There was something in Naruto's voice when he said it, recognition of what that meant. 8 months of waiting and Gaara had the draft ready. "How will Rasa respond?" she asked. "We find out when Sora gets the council's reaction." He straightened up from the wall. "Probably this afternoon. Rasa will want to convene the faction before he responds to anything through official channels." "He's going to read it as the operation creating results," she said. "Yes. He's going to think I pressured you into the concession." Naruto looked at her with the quiet, honest expression. "Does that bother you?" She thought about it genuinely. "No," she said. "Let him think whatever moves the pieces where they need to go." He nodded. "Good." The morning's coordination meeting was, by the standards of what was happening underneath it, almost relaxingly normal. Border checkpoint protocols, resource-sharing frameworks, the ongoing discussion about standardized medical response procedures for multi-village operations. Temari contributed precisely and appropriately. Sora sat at the end of the Sand delegation with his specific watchful stillness, and when the formal notification of Gaara's bilateral review request was delivered to the meeting room at 10:15 by a tower administrative aide, and Kakashi read it aloud with the particular neutrality of someone reading something expected and noting it for the record, she watched Sora's face. The relief was there, quickly managed, but there. He thought the operation had produced a result. He thought her reports had worked. He thought she'd pushed Naruto toward the concession. She maintained a completely neutral expression and wrote a note on her meeting pad that said, "To anyone who might see it, bilateral review, Sand delegation implications, follow-up and meant something else entirely." At lunch, she found a private alcove in the tower's east corridor and sent Ryo a message through the Gaara channel. A brief, coded indicator that the review had been initiated and that the council's response should shift the mechanism's posture within the next 12 hours. Ryo's response came back in 40 minutes, confirmed, standing by. It was early afternoon when the second thing happened. She was walking back to the conference room from a brief break when she saw Naruto at the far end of the corridor, stopped in conversation with one of Kakashi's aides. The aide's posture was wrong, too tight, too careful, the way bodies go when they're delivering news that requires careful delivery. She kept walking at her normal pace and passed close enough to catch fragments. West side, all four, movement pattern changed. She didn't stop. She went into the conference room and sat down and waited. 10 minutes later, during the afternoon session, she felt Naruto's focus shift. A subtle thing, the way attention moves when someone is managing two tracks simultaneously. He kept his surface engagement with the meeting flawless, but she'd been watching him closely enough for long enough to catch it. She passed a note across the table, under the guise of handing over a border protocol document. The note was folded inside the document. 2 words, "What happened?" He received it, read it without expression, and wrote his response in the margin of his own notepad, which he angled toward her by 2 degrees when he set it down. West team moved. 3 of 4 at new position. Watching the northeast gate, she looked at the notepad, then at the meeting, then back. The mechanism team had repositioned. They weren't waiting for the trigger conditions to break. They were moving into something. Either Ryo had lost control of his team or someone else had given them an instruction. The meeting ended at 4. She was out of her chair before the room had fully dispersed. She found Naruto in the corridor. "Ryo hasn't sent the evening confirmation yet." "I know." He was already moving. "His morning confirmation came through at the usual time. Evening is late by 40 minutes. Sora, in the building. Kakashi's got eyes on him." He walked with the controlled speed of someone not running, because running communicated alarm and alarm changed variables. "I sent the ANBU assets to the northeast gate positioning. The 3rd trigger condition," she said, matching his pace. "You leaving the perimeter. They're not waiting for the trigger. They're setting up to create it." He looked at her. Someone told them to move. Someone above Ryo in the chain. She thought through the architecture Ryo had described. Ryo coordinated the team, but the contract authority sat with the client, with Ross's faction through Sora. Sora escalated independently, without the council's instruction. "He got nervous about you," Naruto said. "Your report reassured him, but someone going to check on you last night wasn't authorized by Ryo," she said. That had been nagging at her since it happened. The young operative on her street hadn't felt like Ryo's decision. Too clumsy, too emotional. Sora sent him directly outside the chain. She walked faster, which means Sora has been running parallel communications with at least part of the mechanism team. "Ryo didn't know about it," Naruto said. "It wasn't a question. He'd have flagged it. He's been straight with us." She turned a corner. "Sora is afraid enough to move without authorization. He gave the team the instruction to reposition." She looked at Naruto. "They're going to try to force the trigger themselves. Get you outside the perimeter, not by waiting for you to leave, but by creating a situation that draws you out." Stopped walking. She stopped too. He looked at her with that inward-turning gaze, and she watched him work through it. Then his eyes cleared and he said, "They're going to hit something outside the gate, something I'd respond to." Cold moved through her chest. "What would draw you outside specifically?" He was quiet for exactly 2 seconds and then said, "Hinata's family has a secondary training compound 400 meters past the northeast gate." She looked at him. "Hyuga," he said. "Family, that pulls me." It wasn't sentimental, it was tactical self-knowledge. He knew his own responses. "They know I'd go." "Do they know about the compound specifically?" "The perimeter observers have been watching my routes for 2 weeks. I've been to that compound 3 times. He turned. "I need to. You're not going to that compound," she said. "Temari, listen to me." She stepped in front of him, not blocking his path, just in his space, forcing him to focus. "If you go to that compound, you walk into their trigger. They're positioned at the northeast gate because they expect you to come through it." She held his gaze. "If there's a genuine threat to the Hyuga compound, Konoha's ANBU can respond. You don't have to be the one who goes. If I send ANBU and it's a setup to read as defensive positioning, then it triggers Condition 1 if Ryo's communication chain is compromised, which it already is." She saw him working through it. "The trigger conditions are broken, Naruto. Sora already broke them by going outside the chain," she pressed, "which means we don't have to manage around them anymore. We move now, we move directly, and we pull this apart before Sora can escalate further." He looked at her. 2 seconds of real assessment. Not of the tactical picture, he'd already seen that. Of her. "You're right," he said. "I know." He pulled a communication device from his jacket, a compact model she'd seen Kakashi use. He sent 3 messages in rapid succession. His face was completely focused, the warmth gone under, not the cold professionalism of someone suppressing emotion, but the specific clarity of someone whose emotions had aligned with their purpose. "Kakashi's moving on Sori now," he said. "ANBU is responding to the Hyuga compound, quiet, no visible profile. And Ryo," he paused as a response came back. "Ryo just confirmed. The team repositioned without his knowledge. He's standing by." "He can pull them back," she said. "He's going to have to do it in person." He looked at her. "I need to be at the northeast gate, not to go through it, to be visible at it. If the mechanism team sees me at the gate without going through it, it breaks the tactical logic of their positioning. They set up expecting movement, not a static presence." "You're going to stand at the gate," she said. "I'm going to stand at the gate," he confirmed. "And if they move anyway?" He looked at her with the expression she'd seen during their training, the one that meant he'd already calculated this and was comfortable with the answer. "Then they move." She unslung the fan from her back and braced it on the ground. "Then we're going to the gate." Something shifted in his expression, not surprise, not quite. Something that was 2 parts relief, and 1 part something she didn't have a clean name for. "You really are the best thing your council accidentally did," he said. She pointed the fan at him. "Move!" The northeast gate was a 7-minute walk, and they covered it in 4. The afternoon had gone gray-gold under the clouds, the particular light of a Konoha late afternoon that made the trees look like they were lit from inside. The gate guards recognized Naruto immediately and moved to full attention. "Stand easy," he told them. "Don't change anything." She positioned herself to his right, fan closed and angled across her back, ready but undeployed, a posture that was technically non-threatening and practically the opposite. Beyond the gate the road curved north and then the forest began. The trees were dense enough that the northeast gate was essentially a point of transition between visible and not. She extended her wind reading, out past the gate, into the tree space, reading the air. 4 signatures. The 3 repositioned mechanism operatives and 1 other who'd been there independently, probably the perimeter observer who'd been in place since the beginning. They were still, watching the gate. She felt through the wind the moment the 3 repositioned operatives registered Naruto at the gate and didn't understand what to do with the information. The tactical calculus, they'd built their positioning around required movement through the gate, not presence at it. A target who stood at the threshold and didn't cross had broken the logic of their setup without giving them cause to activate. Good. A movement in her peripheral vision, Ryo, appearing from the direction of the lower east district on foot, moving at a pace that was fast without being running. He'd gotten Naruto's message and come directly. He reached them and assessed the situation in 1 glance. "They're at 4 positions in the tree cover," she said quietly. "Northwest, northeast, and 2 at center spread. The 4th is the original perimeter observer due north." Ryo nodded. "I can call them in." "Do it," Naruto said. Ryo stepped to the gate threshold, not through it, just to it, and made a series of hand signals. Specific, practiced, team recall. Temari watched the tree line. The wind told her when the signatures began to move, slowly at first, then consolidating toward the road. 3 of the 4. The center spread pair and the northwest position. The northeast position didn't move. She felt it a half-second before she saw it, the specific compression of chakra that meant someone was loading a technique. Not building toward a long-range strike, something immediate, close range, targeted at the gate. "Down," she said. She opened the fan in a single motion and drove a wall of compressed air outward through the gate opening into the tree cover at the northeast angle. Not a combat strike, a displacement. The wind hit the tree line with enough force to shatter the technique loading in the chakra signature she'd felt and scatter the operative 3 meters laterally. Naruto was already moving past her through the gate before the air had fully settled. She followed. The operative was on the ground against a tree trunk, young, male, having a difficult moment with his equilibrium from the displacement. Not unconscious, just thoroughly interrupted. He looked up at Naruto standing over him, and to his credit his expression went from disoriented to resigned in under a second, which suggested some experience with situations where the tactical initiative had definitively changed hands. "That was a pressure tag," she said, reading the residual chakra. "Not lethal. Disruptive." She looked at Ryo, who had come through the gate behind them. "That's not mechanism protocol. No, Ryo agreed. He looked at the operative. Sorry gave you supplementary instructions. It wasn't a question. The young operative looked at the ground. Sorry told him to flush you out, she said to Naruto. If you didn't come through the gate, set off the pressure tag at the threshold to make you react. Which would have looked like an attack on Konoha's border, Naruto said. His voice was even, triggering an immediate response, getting me outside the perimeter fast and without planning. He crouched down to the operative's level. She watched him do it, the way he went down to someone's eye line rather than standing above them. It wasn't a tactical choice, it was just who he was. "What's your name?" he asked. The young operative blinked. He hadn't expected that. "Juro," he said after a moment. "Juro, are you hurt?" "Number," he looked confused by the question. "Good," Naruto stood. "You're going to come with us and tell Kakashi exactly what Sora told you and when he told you it." He looked at the young man with complete directness. "You were following instructions from a client who went outside his authority. That's a contract violation, not a personal one. Ryo can speak to that." He glanced at Ryo. "He can," Ryo confirmed. "Okay," Juro said. He sounded like someone who had expected this to go significantly worse. The other three mechanism operatives had gathered near the road. They came in without incident. Ryo's authority over them was intact. Whatever Sora had done through his parallel channel had only compromised this one. They were professionals who'd been handed a compromised contract and seemed on balance relieved to have it clarified. Kakashi's message came through as they were bringing the team back through the gate. Sora contained. "Conference room, when you're ready." Temari looked at Naruto. He looked at her. "Ready," he said. 30 seconds ago, she said. Sora was in the conference room on the 3rd floor with 2 ANBU at the door, and the expression of a man who had run the numbers and understood they didn't work in his favor. He sat at the table with his hands in his lap and a composure that was effortful enough to be visible. Kakashi sat across from him. Temari and Naruto came in and sat down on Kakashi's side. Ryo remained outside with the mechanism team. Sora looked at Temari, and something moved through his expression, not quite betrayal, more the specific disappointment of someone whose prediction about another person has been confirmed in the worst way. "You turned them," he said. "I made a decision," she said, "with better information than you had. You were supposed to. I know what I was supposed to do." She held his gaze. "That's why I know exactly what I chose instead." He was quiet. Kakashi leaned forward. "The bilateral review notice from the Keizukage. Gaara initiated it independently." He set a copy of the formal notice on the table. "Not as a result of your operation, not as a concession generated by Temari's proximity work. Independently, based on his own assessment of Sans' post-war position." He let that land. "Your council sent an operative into Konoha to run an intelligence and potential assassination operation against a sitting Hokage designate. And that operation not only failed, but coincided with the Keizukage, initiating the exact diplomatic outcome your council wanted through entirely legitimate means." Sora stared at the formal notice. "Which means," Kakashi continued, "that everything your council was afraid of, Konoha's dominance, Sans' marginalization, was addressable through the process your council bypassed when they decided to do this instead." He sat back. "Your council paid for a solution to a problem that didn't require their solution." The room was very quiet. Sora looked at the table. He looked like a man doing the specific arithmetic of consequences. "What happens now?" he said. "That's a Sand governance question," Kakashi said, "not ours to determine." He looked at Temari, she looked at Sora. "The cipher correspondence, the operational framework document, Ryo's testimony, all of it goes to Gaara. The Keizukage conducts an internal review under Article 17 governance protocols." She paused. "Rasa and the faction council members face formal sanction." She kept her voice level. "That's Sans' process, not a Konoha action." Sora absorbed this. "Rasa will fight it." "He can try," she said. "He'll lose." She said it with the same flatness she'd used on the operative in the street. "He underestimated Gaara for 8 years and built this entire architecture on the assumption that Gaara's position was weaker than his. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about most things." Naruto hadn't spoken since they'd sat down. He'd let Kakashi and Temari carry the conversation, which she'd noticed and understood. He was deliberately not centering himself in the dismantling of an operation directed at him. making it about process rather than personal threat. It was the same thing he'd done in the meeting about the Stone delegation's grievance. Take the hit, make it about what's next. Sore looked at him now, finally. You knew, Sore said. Before Temari, you knew the council had sent her. I suspected something, Naruto said, not the full shape. You invited her to lunch. Something in Sore's expression shifted, not admiration exactly, a complex adjustment. You invited her to lunch and sparred with her, and she's someone I trust, Naruto said simply. That was true before I knew anything was happening, and it's true now. He held Sore's gaze. That's not a tactic, that's just who she is. Temari looked at the table. Something that she'd been holding at a careful distance arrived suddenly close. Sore closed his eyes, opened them. I'll cooperate with the review, he said. He sounded tired. Completely. Good, Kakashi said. Outside, the clouds had broken. Through the corridor window, she could see the late afternoon light coming through in long shafts, hitting the Hawkage Mountain's stone faces and setting them gold. The village below moved through its evening without knowing that anything had shifted, which was, she supposed, the ideal outcome. When things went right, nothing looked like anything had happened. She stood at the window for a moment while Kakashi and Naruto spoke quietly with Sore, and the ANBU personnel processed the practical logistics of next steps. She looked at the mountain and thought about her father's face on it. Not there, not carved, not recorded. He hadn't been a Hawkage. He hadn't been the kind of man who got carved into anything permanent, but Gaara was going to be. Someday, she thought, maybe not in stone, but in the record of what this period actually was, what it had chosen to be, her brother would be in it. She was going to make sure of that. Naruto appeared at her shoulder. You okay? It was the third time someone had asked her that in 2 weeks. She was starting to understand it as its own kind of language, not a check-in but an acknowledgement, a way of saying I see the weight you're carrying without requiring anything specific in return. Yes, she said, and then, all of it. All of it, he confirmed. He looked at the mountain with her. Ryo and his team will be formally processed tomorrow. Sans governance review begins when Gaara signals. The trade countermoves are already in motion. He paused. It's done, mostly. There's still Rasa, he said, but that's Gaara's problem now, his jurisdiction, his process. He looked at her. He's going to be okay. I know, she said. Do you? No, she thought about the letter, the spare precise sentences. You turn the right direction, don't doubt that. Yes, she said, I know. He nodded. They stood at the window while the gold light moved across the stone and the village came into its evening, and the particular sense of something having resolved without explosion settled into the room like weather changing. Same time tomorrow, he said finally. She looked at him sideways. Training ground, he confirmed. She looked back at the mountain. Don't push it, she said, for the third time since she'd arrived. Too late, he said, for the third time since she'd arrived. She almost laughed. She let it happen. It came out smaller than his laugh, more contained, but real, actually real, not managed, not calculated. He smiled at the sound of it like it was something he'd been waiting for. The evening came in, and the village held them in its noise and its green-smelling, ordinary life. And the war before the war was over. And what came next was something neither of them had quite started to name yet. Chapter 6. What the Wind Keeps. Gaara arrived in Konoha on a Tuesday unannounced. Not secretly, he came through the main gate in broad daylight with 2 Sand Jonin as escort and the Kazekage formal travel seal visible on his identification, which meant the gate guards had it logged and the tower knew within minutes. But he hadn't sent advance notice. No diplomatic communication, no scheduled arrival window. He simply appeared the way Gaara had always done things that mattered, without ceremony and without asking permission. Temari was at the training ground when Shikamaru's message found her. She read it, looked at Naruto across the cleared space between them and said, "My brother is at the main gate." Naruto lowered his hands from the sensory extension form he'd been working and didn't look surprised. "I figured he'd come." "You figured?" "He wrote that he'd hold. He didn't say for how long." He rolled his neck. "How long has it been since he held something uncomfortable?" She thought about it. "Never," she said. "Right." He picked up his water bottle. "Let's go." Gaara was in the tower's secondary reception room when they arrived. Not the formal room used for official diplomatic meetings. The smaller one that had mismatched chairs and a window overlooking the garden. Someone had given him tea that he hadn't touched. His two escort jonin were outside the door. He was sitting very straight in the least comfortable-looking chair with the specific stillness that meant he was managing a significant internal state through pure discipline. He looked at Temari when she came in, and something moved in his face, relief, she thought, and underneath that the particular compressed emotion of a person who had been worried about someone they love and was seeing them in one piece. He didn't express any of it directly because Gara had never been built for direct emotional expression. He expressed it by standing up. She crossed the room and the hug was brief and not entirely comfortable. They had never been a physically demonstrative family and they weren't going to start now, but it was real, and when she stepped back, she could see that the worry had resolved into something else. "You look like you've been sleeping," he said. "I've been sleeping fine," she said. "You look better than fine." He studied her face with the precision of someone reading a very familiar text for new information. "Something changed." "Several things changed," she said. "I'll tell you all of them." Then he looked at Naruto, who was standing by the door with the posture of someone who has correctly read that a sibling reunion moment is happening and is giving it appropriate space. They looked at each other, Naruto and Gara, two people who had fought beside each other and written oblique letters to each other for 2 years and understood each other through the specific medium of having both been shaped by forces that should have destroyed them. Gara said, "Thank you for protecting her." "She didn't need protecting," Naruto said immediately. "She handled most of it." "I know," Gara said. "Thank you anyway." Naruto accepted this with a nod that was less agreement and more acknowledgement, the kind of nod that said, "I hear what you're actually saying," without getting into the architecture of it. Temari watched the exchange and thought about how Gara said things he meant completely, and Naruto heard them completely, and there was almost no friction in the space between the two of them. She thought about how unusual that was. They sat down, all three of them, with Kakashi arriving 10 minutes later to make it 4. And the conversation that followed was the kind that took a long time to have properly and couldn't be rushed. Gara laid out the current state of Sans Council. Rasa had received the formal bilateral review notice and had convened the faction. Their initial response had been, as predicted, to read it as evidence the operation was producing results. They were cautiously pleased, which meant they were stationary, which meant Gara had the window he needed. "The documentation Temari gathered," Gara said. "The cipher correspondence, the operational framework, combined with Ryo's formal testimony, which he provided in writing this morning." He glanced at Temari. "Ryo gave full testimony at first light," she confirmed. "Kakashi has the record." "Then I have what I need for Article 17, Gara said. "The formal council review can be initiated immediately. Rasa and the 3 identified faction members will be suspended pending investigation under Sans Governance Code." He paused. "Dama will likely cooperate in exchange for reduced sanction. The 2 founding clan representatives will resist, but their institutional bases are smaller than they present. They can be managed." "Rasa?" Kakashi asked. Gara was quiet for a moment. "Rasa is 63 years old and has been building this particular architecture for 24 months. He believes in what he's doing." He looked at the window. "He's wrong. He's caused serious harm. He'll face significant sanction." Another pause. "But he's not evil. He's frightened and old, and he built the wrong response to a real problem." Temari looked at her brother. She thought about how she'd said something similar to Naruto over soup. Fear doesn't become stupid just because the response to it is, and recognized where she'd learned to think that way. "The real problem," Naruto said, "Sans post-war position. We're addressing it in the bilateral review." "The review opens the formal channel," Gara said. "What happens in that channel depends on what Konoha brings to the table." "Resource renegotiation," Naruto said without hesitation. "The Fire Country trade routes. I want a permanent preferred status clause for sand in the revised agreements, not conditional, written into the base framework." He looked at Kakashi. Kakashi had the expression of a man making several calculations simultaneously. "The Fire Daimyo will want something in return." "The daimyo wants stability," Naruto said. "A stable sand is a stable southern border for Fire Country. He'll understand the logic." He looked at Gara. "There's also the joint training program. We've been discussing it informally, sand and leaf, cross-village Jonin exchange for 6 months, rotating. Formalizing that in the review framework gives both sides something visible. Gaara looked at him for a long moment. You prepared for this? I've been thinking about it, Naruto said. For a while, he held Gaara's look. Your council was afraid Konoha would absorb everything. The way to prove that wrong isn't to argue about it. It's to build something that only works if both sides are genuinely independent. Gaara was quiet. The joint program, he said finally. I want Sand to host the first rotation. Done, Naruto said. Kakashi made a note with the expression of someone who had once again arrived at the point where something Naruto had apparently been planning for weeks was being formally executed in real time. They worked through the framework for 2 more hours. Temari contributed the specific knowledge she had of Sand's trade route infrastructure, of the administrative bottlenecks in the current agreements, of the 3 brokers whose contracts had been intercepted before the secondary activation, and watched Gaara and Naruto build something across the table with the particular efficiency of 2 people who trusted each other's reasoning and didn't need to validate every step. It was, she thought, what the council had been afraid of: Naruto building alliances, consolidating relationships, drawing the other villages into something centered on Konoha. But watching it happen from the inside, what she saw wasn't consolidation. It was construction. Something that had load-bearing weight on both sides, something that would be weaker if either side pulled out rather than stronger for one at the other's expense. She thought about how you could look at the same structure from 2 angles and see either a trap or a foundation. When the working session ended, and Kakashi had moved the conversation to logistics and scheduling, and the practical machinery of formalizing what had been discussed, Gaara caught Temari's eye and tilted his head slightly. She recognized the gesture. He used it when he wanted a private conversation and didn't want to make it into an event. She followed him into the corridor. He walked to the window at the corridor's end and looked out at the garden below. The afternoon was clear now. The clouds from the day before had moved on, and the light was doing the late afternoon thing that she'd started to appreciate. The way it came through Konoha's trees at a specific angle that made everything look slightly more considered than it probably was. Tell me about the assignment, he said. The beginning of it, what you thought, she told him. All of it, the scroll before dawn, the council chamber, Rasa's careful voice, and Dama's precise one, the decision she'd made standing at her desk at 2 in the morning. She told him about the first spar and what she'd noticed underneath Naruto's warmth, and the decision that had solidified around words she hadn't fully intended to say. She didn't organize it into a report. She just said it, the way you say things to someone you trust completely. Gaara listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. I should have told you about Rasa, he said, 8 months ago when I first understood the direction. You didn't know the full architecture. I knew enough. He looked at her. There was something in his face that she recognized as guilt, which was an emotion Gaara had been learning to carry for years and had never fully made peace with. I protected you from the information because I didn't want to put you in a position where you had to choose. I thought I was giving you space. He paused. I was making the choice for you. She looked at her brother, the Kazekage, the man who had been a monster and chosen not to be, who had learned love late and learned it completely, who carried the weight of his position with a steadiness that most people would buckle under. Gaara, she said, I chose. I know. And I chose right. I know that too. He looked back at the garden. That's not the point. The point is that I should have trusted you with the information before it was a crisis. He was quiet. I do that. I protect people by removing their options. I'm trying to stop. She thought about this, about the specific failure mode of people who loved others. The way protection became management became a kind of quiet erasure of agency. She'd seen it in the council's treatment of Gaara himself. She'd felt the edge of it in this situation. You're getting better at it, she said. Slowly is still movement. He almost smiled. With Gaara, almost was the whole distance. Naruto, he said. She looked at the garden. Yes, she said, keeping her voice neutral. You like him. He said it with the directness that was just Gaara's default register, not pointed, not teasing, just factual. I respect him, she said. That's also true, he agreed. They're not mutually exclusive. He glanced at her. You look at him differently than you look at most people. He's not like most people. Number a pause. He's not. Another pause. Is Shikamaru aware? She looked at the garden. Shikamaru is aware of everything, she said carefully. He doesn't say anything about it. That's his version of permission, Gaara said. She didn't respond because there wasn't a response that was honest and also simple, and she was too tired for complicated. I'm not telling you what to do, Gaara said. I've been very specifically trying not to do that. He looked at her. I'm just saying he's someone who deserves to be told what is true, whatever is true. A pause. He was very clear about protecting your reputation in there. In the session, did you notice? She had noticed. Naruto had structured the entire discussion of the council's operation in terms of intelligence failure and political miscalculation, never naming Temari's role as spy, never using the word turned, framing it consistently as Sans' governance problem rather than anything involving her personal choices. He'd built a version of events that was accurate in every important way and protected her standing completely. She hadn't asked him to. He'd done it without comment. I noticed, she said. Gaara nodded once like this confirmed something. I should get back, she said. Of course. He started back toward the meeting room, then stopped, looked at her over his shoulder. Temari, you made the right call, every step. He held her gaze for a moment. I want you to know that I know that, she breathed. Thank you, she said. He nodded and walked back, and she stood at the corridor window for a moment looking at the garden and the light and the city that smelled like green things and rain. The formal sanctioned proceedings against Rasa's faction began 2 days later. They were conducted by Sans' Governance Council, not the faction, the full institutional body, which included clan representatives and administrative authorities who had not been part of Rasa's operation, and who received the documentation with varying degrees of shock, anger, and the particular exhausted resignation of people who had suspected something was wrong and were now looking at the confirmation. Temari wasn't in Sunagakure for the proceedings. She was still in Konoha, her coordination meeting duties continuing through their scheduled end, which meant she followed events through Gaara's dispatches rather than in person. This was an odd experience, being present for the architecture and absent for the resolution. Like building a structure and watching someone else put the final piece in from across a valley. Gaara's dispatches were characteristically precise. Dama cooperated immediately and fully as predicted. The two founding clan representatives attempted to frame their participation as advisory rather than operational, which Gaara dismantled in the session record with the same unflappant efficiency he applied to most things. Rasa was the last. The dispatch about Rasa was longer than the others. He argued for 3 hours, Gaara wrote, not defensively. He genuinely believes he was right. He presented his case with full coherence, Sans' resource position, Konoha's structural advantages, the historical pattern of strong villages absorbing weaker ones in post-war periods. His analysis of the problem is not wrong. His method was indefensible. I listened to all of it. Then I told him that the bilateral review, the actual diplomatic process, had already produced 2 of the 3 outcomes he said he was trying to achieve, and that he had nearly destroyed both villages' ability to build anything further. He was quiet for a long time after that. He has been formally removed from the council. The sanction includes a 5-year bar from any governance role. He accepted it without further argument. I think he understood at the end. I'm not sure that's a comfort. Sometimes understanding too late is worse than not understanding. She read that last line twice. She wrote back, you did well, all of it. His response, so did you. The final coordination meeting was on a Friday afternoon. Closing session, signing of the preliminary bilateral review framework. The formal agreements would take months to finalize, but the framework document established the commitments and the timeline and the joint program structure that Naruto and Gaara had built across the table 3 days ago. It was a good document. She'd read it 4 times and found nothing she wanted to change, which by her standards was a significant endorsement. The room had a different quality at the end of a process than at the beginning, looser, more human, the professional faces slightly relaxed. The stone delegation representative who'd had his grievance addressed shook Naruto's hand with something that looked like genuine warmth. The cloud representative made a joke about Konoha's paper supply that got a real laugh from Kakashi. Small things. The residue of people having spent time in the same space, working toward the same direction. Sora was not present. His seat had been filled by a sand administrative official who had arrived with Gaara and who was, as far as Temari could tell, simply a competent administrator with no additional operational agenda, which was practically exotic by this point. When the session closed and the room began its after-meeting dispersal, she stayed in her chair for a moment. Not dramatically, just the specific pause of someone who is moving from one thing into whatever comes after it and wants to be present for the transition. "Long 2 weeks," Shikamaru said. He was suddenly next to her, which was a Shikamaru-specific phenomenon. He moved without calling attention to the movement. "Very," she said. "The bilateral framework is good," he said. "The trade preferred status clause especially, that was smart positioning, Naruto's positioning. You shaped the specific language on the trade routes. I read the draft." He looked at her with the half-closed assessment. "You're good at this, the diplomatic architecture you've always been." She looked at the table. "The council used it as cover." "The council misused a real capability," he said. "That's different." He was quiet for a moment. "You're going to be here through the weekend before you leave. Gaara is staying through Sunday. I'm leaving when he does. Then we have the weekend." He looked across the room to where Naruto was talking to the cloud representative, easy and warm, the same person in every context. "He's going to want to do something. Dinner, probably. He does that at the end of things." "Is that an invitation?" "That's a prediction," Shikamaru said. He stood up, which are generally interchangeable when it comes to Naruto. He collected his papers. "Don't overthink it," he said, quietly, specifically. She looked at him. "The obvious thing," he said. "Don't overthink it." He walked out of the room, and she watched him go and sat with the particular quality of advice delivered by someone who loved you and had no agenda except for your actual happiness. The dinner was at Ikaraku's, because of course it was. Naruto's social geography always resolved back to Ikaraku's the way rivers resolved back to the sea. It wasn't a small gathering. Sakura arrived with Ino, who brought the good sake she apparently kept for occasions she'd decided were worth it. Shikamaru and Choji came together with the gravitational ease of 2 people who had been moving in the same orbit since childhood. Gaara attended, which was notable. Gaara at a casual social dinner was a relatively new development, one he'd been practicing with the same deliberate commitment he brought to everything. He sat at the end of the counter and ate without speaking much and watched the collective warmth of the group with an expression that wasn't quite comfortable but was something better, genuine. Temari sat in the middle of it and let herself be in it, not performing, not assessing, just there. The sake was good. The ramen was excellent. Naruto argued with Lee about training methodology again, and Sakura let it run longer than usual because she was in a good mood, and the argument was objectively entertaining. Ino told a story about a mission that had gone sideways in a way that was apparently funny in retrospect, and was definitely funny now. Gaara, at one point, made a dry observation in his flat voice that made everyone at the counter stop for a half-second before laughing, and the surprise on his face when they laughed suggested it had been slightly more successful than he'd anticipated. Temari watched her brother make people laugh and thought she might actually cry, which was absurd, and stopped herself through the simple discipline of finishing her sake and focusing on the conversation. At some point the evening thinned. Ino had a morning mission. Lee remembered a training commitment. The gathering found its natural end the way good evenings did, not with any single departure, but with a gradual warmth-preserving dissolution. Gaara left with his escort Jonin with a brief nod to Temari that communicated tomorrow morning, details to discuss without requiring words. Shikamaru and Choji went in one direction, Sakura in another. And then it was just Temari and Naruto at the counter, with the old man Tuchai cleaning up around them with the unhurried patience of someone who had seen thousands of evenings end at this counter, and expected thousands more. She had her hands around the last of the warm tea Tuchai had put down without asking. Naruto had his elbows on the counter and was looking at the space in front of him with the comfortable unfocus of someone who was thinking loosely rather than with purpose. "Good evening," he said finally. "Yes," she agreed. Gaara seemed, he searched for the right word. "Present," she offered. "Yeah," he smiled at the counter. "Present, that's good, that's a lot for him." "He's been practicing," she said. "He doesn't do things he's not willing to commit to." Naruto looked at her sideways. "Where do you think he gets that?" She looked at her tea. She thought about what Gaara had said in the corridor. "He's someone who deserves to be told what is true, whatever is true." She set the tea down. "Naruto," she said. He turned to look at her fully. Something in his posture shifted to attention without any dramatic signal, just the particular quality of presence that meant he was here completely for whatever came next. "The 2 weeks," she said. "What happened in them?" She held his look. "I want you to know that it didn't stay a mission for me. It stopped being that." She paused. "Quite early." He was very still. "I know that's complicated," she continued, "given what it started as, given Shikamaru." She stopped, steadied. "Shikamaru and I are." She paused again, finding the honest version. "We are what we've always been, which is real and important and not," she found it, "not this." He was quiet for a moment. She watched something work through his expression, not surprise. She'd been right. He'd felt the shape of it building, but something more careful, more considered. "Shikamaru knows," he said. It wasn't a question. "Shikamaru knows everything," she said. "Always." She looked at her hands. "He told me not to overthink the obvious thing." Naruto breathed out, a long, quiet breath. Then he said, "I've been thinking about what to do with this for about 10 days. 10 days, she said. "You move fast." "I paid attention fast," he corrected. "What to do with it, that took longer." He looked at her directly with the full, honest blue of his eyes. "You're going back to Suna. I'm being confirmed as Hokage in 10 days. We're in the middle of a diplomatic framework that took a crisis to build. There are about 8 reasons to be careful." "8 is a lot," she said. "None of them are good enough," he said simply. She looked at him, the empty counter. The old man Tuchai moving plates at the far end without looking over, giving them the privacy of deliberate inattention. The night outside, Konoha's particular night sounds, the city at rest. "I'll be in Konoha regularly," she said. "The joint training program, the bilateral review sessions, the coordination meetings." "I know," he said, "and you'll come to Sooner at some point. The framework requires it." "I know that too." He wasn't filling the space with reassurance or logistics. He was just looking at her with the patient attention she'd been watching him give to every difficult and worthwhile thing. "So," she said. "So," he said. "This is complicated," she said. "Most good things are," he said. He'd said it before, over the terrace railing at Ino's gathering, looking at the village. And she'd noted it then and filed it, and here it was again, consistent, because that was who he was. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she did something she hadn't planned. She reached across the counter and covered his hand with hers for exactly 3 seconds. Not dramatic, not a declaration, just contact, honest and uncomplicated. He looked at their hands, then at her. 3 seconds, he said. "Don't push it," she said. He grinned, the broad one, the enormous genuine one, and it was so completely him that she felt it in her chest like something landing. She took her hand back and finished her tea and stood up and said good night to Tuchai, who responded with the warmth of someone who had watched a lot of lives happen at his counter and was satisfied with the direction of this one. She walked back to the inn in the night air and the green-smelling dark of Konoha streets, and she thought about what the wind kept. The wind in the desert kept nothing. It moved through and took and rearranged and moved on, indifferent and immense, the greatest force she'd ever learned to work with precisely because it held nothing still. You didn't fight the desert wind. You read it. You used it. You understood that its power was in the movement, not the holding. The wind here was different, softer, more complicated, full of the smell of living things and the weight of stayed air under leaves. It moved differently. It could, she was beginning to understand, carry things without losing them. The desert wind scattered. This one, sometimes, kept. She thought about what it meant to keep things, to choose what to hold rather than letting the movement decide for you. She'd made a choice 2 weeks ago that had looked, from the outside, like a mission going wrong. From the inside, it had felt like something resolving, like a current that had been running underground finally reaching the surface and finding that the surface was exactly where it was supposed to be. She stood at the inn window for a while. The city was dark and quiet in the specific way of a city that was deeply populated and genuinely asleep. She thought about Rasa in a council chamber in Sunagakur, stripped of his seat, having understood too late. She thought about Soroi cooperating with the review and the young operative Juro, who hadn't expected to be asked his name. She thought about the document folded inside her shirt, the document that had started all of this, and how its 14 pages of careful operational language had ended up being the thing that unmade the operation it described. She thought about Gara making people laugh at a counter in a ramen shop and not understanding why it worked and being delighted that it had. She thought about Naruto. Then she stopped thinking about it and simply felt it, the way you feel something that has settled after long motion. Not solved, not finished, but set down correctly, placed rather than dropped, in a position from which it could grow into whatever it was going to be. She went to bed and slept well. She was at the training ground at 6 in the morning. He was there before her, of course he was, sitting on the log with his hands in his pockets, looking at the mist in the trees, looking up when she walked out of the tree line with the fan on her shoulder. He said, "Morning," she said. "Don't start." He said, "I wasn't going to." She raised an eyebrow. "I was going to ask if you wanted to work on the sensory extension," he said. "I've been thinking about a modification, and I want your read on the wind mechanics." He stood up, entirely calm, as though the previous evening had settled into its correct place in the sequence of things, and he was simply present for what came next. "But we could also just spar if you want." She looked at him in the gray morning light, at the training ground that had been the site of their first honest conversation and everything that had followed from it, at the mist in the trees and the particular quiet of a morning that hadn't started yet, full of potential, unallocated. She unsung the fan. "Show me the modification," she said. He smiled, and the morning opened up around them. The mist moving through the trees, the birds beginning, the village waking somewhere below, and they worked in the particular focused silence of people who had found a way to be useful to each other that was also, quietly, a joy. She read the wind while he extended his chakra into it, and she told him what the air was doing, and he adjusted and tried again. And between them, something was built that neither of them could have built alone, which was perhaps the simplest and most honest description of everything that had happened. 4 days later, standing at the main gate with her travel pack and her fan and Gara beside her with his escort, she shook Kakashi's hand and said goodbye to Sakura and Ino, and nodded to Shikamaru with something between them that didn't require words. Naruto was the last. He stood in front of her with his hands in his pockets and the morning behind him and said, "The first bilateral review session is in 6 weeks. Sooner is hosting." "I know," she said. "I'll be there." "I know you will," he looked at her. "Safe travel." "Don't start becoming cautious," she said. "It would ruin your whole thing." He laughed, the broad, genuine, loud one, the one that made people nearby look over and reflexively smile because it was that kind of laugh. She let it land. "See you in 6 weeks," she said. 6 weeks, he agreed. She turned and walked through the gate with Gara, out into the open road, and the morning spread ahead of them in the gold and clear of a good day, and Konoha fell behind them in its green and complicated beauty. Gara said nothing for the first 2 miles, which was Gara's way. She let the silence be what it was. Then he said, quietly watching the road, 6 weeks is not very long. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He said nothing else. She said nothing else. The road opened ahead of them, and the wind picked up, warm from the south, coming up from the desert, carrying the particular dry clarity of home. She tilted her face into it. She thought about what the wind keeps. She thought she understood it now.